Nobody's buying that wreck, the auctioneer said, almost laughing into his microphone. $13. Do I hear 13? The crowd chuckled. Cole Dawson sat in the back row with his last $20 bill, folded in his shirt pocket, his hands trembling, his heart doing something it hadn't done in years believing. He raised his card before the laughter died. The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at the broke biker in the worn leather jacket who just bought himself a decade of somebody else's problems. Before we go any further, if this is the kind of story that hits you somewhere, do us a favor and subscribe to this channel right now. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. Cole Dawson had not planned on going to the county auction that Tuesday morning. He had planned on doing what he had been doing for the past several months, which was waking up before 6 in a rented room that smelled like mildew and old carpet, drinking black coffee from a gas station paper cup, and scanning the classifieds for any mechanic work that didn't require a background check. That was his life. That was the full shape of it. A twin mattress, a toolbox he hadn't pawned yet, and a county classifieds page folded in half. He had seen the listing for the Red Valley Harley shop almost by accident. It was buried 3 pages into the legal notices section, sandwiched between a listing for unclaimed storage units and a notice about unpaid property taxes. The description was brief. Commercial property, 200 square feet corner of Route 9 and Blackwater Road, Red Valley, Montana. Opening bid $13. Reason for discount unresolved title dispute. Outstanding municipal liens, contested estate status. Cole had read that description 4 times. Most people saw a legal nightmare dressed up in cheap numbers. Cole saw something else, though he couldn't have explained it then, if someone had put a gun to his head and demanded an answer. He just felt it. That low, wordless pull in the chest that a man only gets a handful of times in his life, if he's lucky enough to feel it at all. Borrowed $12 from his landlord, Mrs. Patricia Guerrero, a 73-year-old woman who had never asked him what he'd done before Red Valley and who brought him leftover tamales on Sunday nights without being asked. He told her he needed it for groceries. She looked at him over the rim of her reading glasses and said, "Cole, I've been on this earth long enough to know when a man is lying and when he's just protecting something he's not ready to say out loud yet. Take the money." She pushed the folded bills across the kitchen table. He took them without argument. The auction was held in the county courthouse parking lot on a Wednesday with a fold-up table, a microphone on a stand, and about 40 people who showed up mostly out of curiosity. Cole recognized 2 or 3 faces, a couple of real estate agents he'd seen around town, a property developer named Victor Harlan, who showed up wearing a jacket that cost more than Cole's entire wardrobe, and a few locals who came the way people come to watch something fail in real time. Victor Harlan was hard to miss. He stood at the front with 2 men Cole assumed were lawyers or assistants or whatever expensive men called themselves when they followed other expensive men around. Victor had the look of someone who had never once in his adult life wondered whether his card would get declined at the grocery store. He stood with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and he kept glancing at the property address on his printed sheet like he was already calculating what he'd demolish first. The auctioneer was a heavy-set man named Gerald, who clearly wanted to be somewhere else. He read through the property details with the enthusiasm of a man reading the back of a cereal box, rattled off the laying complications in a monotone that made 3 people in the crowd check their phones and then announce the opening bid of $13 in a voice that suggested he had personally lost faith in the entire process. $13, Gerald said. Who wants to start us off? Silence. Victor Harlan did not raise his card. Cole noticed that immediately. A man like Victor didn't open. He waited. He let other people exhaust themselves, and then he came in at the end with a number that made everyone else feel stupid for trying. Gerald waited, shifted his weight. "Come on, folks. $13. That's less than a movie ticket. Somebody's got to want this." More silence. A few uncomfortable laughs. Cole raised his card. The laugh that went through the crowd was not cruel exactly. It was the kind of laugh people produce when they see something they believe is a mistake happening in slow motion. A few people turned to look at him directly. Someone behind him actually said, under their breath, but not quietly enough, "Oh Lord, that poor man." Gerald blinked. "We have 13. Do I hear 20? Victor Harlan turned around then for the first time and looked at Cole. Not a quick glance, a full, unhurried look, the kind of man gives something he is trying to appraise. Cole met his eyes and didn't look away. Victor's expression didn't change much, but something shifted behind it. Some small recalibration. Gerald waited another full minute. Nobody else raised a card. Sold it, Gerald said, finally, with the energy of a man who had given up entirely. To the gentleman in the back, $13. Cole walked up to the table, handed over his folded bills, and signed his name on 3 different forms. His hand was steady. He didn't know why his hand was steady. Every logical part of his brain was screaming at him. But his hand was steady. When Gerald handed him the keys, an old ring with 2 brass keys and a faded plastic tag that said Whitmore's Cycle and Repair. Cole held them in his palm for a moment and just looked at them. Victor Harlan appeared at his shoulder. "I'm going to give you a number," Victor said. His voice was conversational, almost friendly. "Call me when you figure out what you've gotten yourself into, and you will figure it out. Usually takes people about 3 weeks. He handed Cole a business card without waiting for a response and walked back toward his car. Cole pocketed the card without looking at it. He walked to his truck, sat behind the wheel, and held the keys in his fist. His chest was doing that thing again. That low pull. He hadn't felt it in years, not since before everything went sideways, before the chapter, before the arrest. That wasn't his, but that carried his name anyway, before the long unraveling that left him here in Red Valley with a mildewed rental room and a landlord who brought him tamales. He drove to Blackwater Road alone. The Whitmore's Cycle and Repair building sat at the corner of Route 9 like it had been waiting, not in a dramatic way, in the quiet way that abandoned things wait without expectation, without urgency, just present. The front windows were boarded from the inside. The sign above the door had weathered to the point where the name was more suggestion than text. Tall weeds had grown up along the base of the building, and the parking lot had cracked in a dozen places where grass had pushed through over the years. Cole sat in his truck across the street and looked at it for a long time. I had been a Hells Angels member for 11 years. Not the Hollywood version, not the movie poster version, the real version which involved long hours of actual mechanical work. Loyalty that cut both ways, and the eventual understanding that organizations built on power eventually eat the people inside them when they run out of external things to consume. I had left 3 years ago under circumstances that were complicated to explain. And simple in their damage, he had refused to do something he was told to do, and the refusal had cost him nearly everything. His reputation in the motorcycle community was not destroyed exactly. It was complicated. Some men respected him for walking away, some didn't respect him at all. Most just didn't think about him, which was its own particular kind of erasure. He got out of his truck and walked to the front door. The larger brass key slid in easily, which surprised him. He had expected rust resistance, the physical argument of a door that didn't want to open. Instead, it opened smoothly, like someone had oiled the lock recently, which made no sense, and which Cole filed away in the back of his mind as a detail that would matter later. He stepped inside. What Cole found in that building made him stop walking entirely. He had expected decay. He had expected the inside to match the outside. Broken hollows surrendered. He had expected to spend weeks clearing debris before he could even figure out what he was working with. Instead, the interior of Whitmore's Cycle and Repair looked like time had simply paused. 3 vintage Harley-Davidson motorcycles stood in the showroom area, positioned with the kind of deliberate care that a person gives to things they love. Not abandoned, placed. A 1959 Panhead, its chrome catching the thin light that came through the gaps in the boarded windows. A 1971 FX Super Glide black tank original paint, a 1965 Electra Glide with the kind of patina that serious collectors spent years trying to replicate artificially. The tool wall along the back was organized, not dusty organized, actually organized with outlines marked on pegboard for every tool so you could see at a glance what was there and what was missing. A workbench ran the full length of the right side of the building, and on it sat a partial restoration. A shovel-head engine with its top-end removed parts laid out in the exact sequence you'd need them in to reassemble correctly. Someone had stopped mid-job. Just stopped, stood up, and walked away. Cole moved through the space, carefully touching nothing. Yet the way you move through a room where something important has happened, and you're not sure yet what it was. The office at the back was small, A wooden desk, a filing cabinet, a lamp, a chair with a cracked vinyl seat. On the desk sat a steel strongbox, not a wall safe, but the portable kind, the kind people bought at hardware stores for keeping important papers. It had a combination lock on the front that was set to open position, meaning the lock was disengaged, meaning someone had left it unlocked deliberately. On top of the strongbox was an envelope, white letter size, slightly yellowed at the edges. Two words were written on the front in a careful old-fashioned hand for Cole. He stared at it. Cole Dawson stood alone in a building he had bought 40 minutes ago for $13 in a town where very few people knew his last name, looking at an envelope with his first name written on it in handwriting he did not recognize. I didn't touch it right away. He took a step back. He looked at the envelope from a distance as if distance would help him understand it. His brain immediately began generating rational explanations and discarding them one by one. A coincidence of names possible, but the handwriting was too deliberate, too careful, not a casual label. A mistake, but for Cole to be a mistake, you'd have to believe someone else named Cole was also supposed to be in this exact building, which required a chain of coincidences that collapsed under its own weight. He picked it up. The envelope was sealed. The paper had the particular stiffness of something that had been sitting untouched for years. He turned it over in his hands. No return address. No date on the outside, just his name. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded in thirds written on both sides in the same careful hand. And the writing was dense and deliberate, every line sitting exactly on the horizontal, as if the person had used a ruler or had simply spent enough years writing this way that straight lines came naturally. Cole, if you're reading this, then you found your way here, and that means everything worked out the way I hoped it would. I know you don't know my name yet. I know you're standing in that office wondering if you've lost your mind or if somebody played some kind of elaborate trick on you. You haven't. Nobody did. Just keep reading. My name is Arthur Whitmore. I opened this shop in 1971 and I ran it for 33 years. I taught myself everything I know about Harley engines from a library book and a second-hand motor on a concrete floor, and eventually I knew enough to teach other people. That's what this shop became, really. Not a business. A school that happened to fix motorcycles on the side. I want to tell you why I chose you. And I want to explain what I'm asking you to consider because I'm not a man who does things to people without their knowledge. Even when they're not there to say yes or no, I still feel like I owe them an explanation. 12 years ago on a Tuesday in October on Highway 93 north of Missoula, an old man's truck broke down with a flat tire and a second flat in the spare, which made him what people in that situation are, which is stuck. I'm 71 years old, or I was, when this happened, and I had already had one heart attack, and my wife had been gone for 4 years, and I was driving back from her sister's funeral, and I was not in a good way. And I pulled to the shoulder, and I got out, and I looked at that flat tire, and I thought seriously and plainly that I might just sit down on the highway's edge and wait for something to happen to me. Before I could decide what that meant or what I was going to do about it, a motorcycle pulled off behind me. The rider was a big man in a black jacket. He didn't ask if I needed help. He saw the flat and the useless spare, said, "Give me a minute," pulled a patch kit and a portable inflator out of his saddlebag, and spent 40 minutes on his knees on the shoulder of Highway 93 fixing my tire in the cold. He wouldn't take any money. He didn't say much. When he was done, he asked if my truck started, fine, watched me pull out, and then rode away north. I got his license plate. I've always been a man who notes things down. It took me 2 years to find you after that, Cole. I'm old, and I'm not good with computers, and the people I had to ask for help didn't always want to give it. But I found you, and I spent the next several years watching from a distance the way you watch something you care about but can't interfere with. I watched you leave the chapter. I watched what happened after. I watched you come to Red Valley. I kept thinking I would contact you directly. But I'm a stubborn old man, and I believe that some things have to happen naturally to mean anything. I believe that if I handed you this place directly, it wouldn't stick. You'd feel like you owed me something, and men who feel like they owe something don't move freely. I wanted you to choose this place on your own. So I arranged with the help of people I trust to make sure the property stayed in county limbo long enough, at a price ridiculous enough that if you were ever in Red Valley and ever desperate enough and ever still, the kind of man who raises his hand when nobody else does, you'd find your way to it. I died in March. I don't know what month or year it is when you're reading this. But I died in March the way I always expected I would, quietly before 6 in the morning, sitting in the chair in the office you're probably standing near right now. The shop is yours, Cole, not as a gift, as a responsibility, which is a much harder thing to give a person than a gift, and a much more honest one. There is more in the strongbox. Read the journals. You'll understand the rest. I'm glad it was you. Arthur Whitmore. Cole read the letter twice. Then he sat down in the chair with the cracked vinyl seat, and he put the letter on the desk in front of him, and he sat there in the quiet of that preserved building for a long time without moving. His throat was doing something that he hadn't let it do in a long time. He pressed his back teeth together and breathed through his nose and looked at the strong box. Then he got up and opened it. The strong box was loaded, not with money, with paper journals, folders, folded documents, photographs. Dozens of photographs organized in envelopes by what appeared to be year. Beneath the photographs were 7 composition notebooks, the black and white kind you bought in drugstores, filled front to back with Arthur Whitmore's careful ruler-straight handwriting. Cole picked up the top notebook, the one labeled simply with a year 1987, and opened it to the first page. What he began reading over the next hour and a half, sitting in a dead man's chair in a building that was now somehow his, was not a business record. It was not an inventory log or a maintenance schedule, though those things existed too, tucked in separate folders. It was a record of people, 40 years of people. Name, year, circumstances, outcome. Arthur wrote about every person who had ever come through his shop in a state of genuine need, not customers looking for chrome upgrades, not enthusiasts wanting restoration quotes, but people who arrived at the edge of some cliff in their lives and ended up, by some combination of desperation and luck, sitting across from Arthur Whitmore at this same desk. 1987, a 24-year-old named Daniel Reeves, who had done 22 months for armed robbery and couldn't get hired anywhere in a 30-mile radius. Arthur taught him to rebuild transmissions. Daniel opened his own shop in 1994 in Billings. He sent Arthur a Christmas card every year until Arthur died. 1988, a woman named Cheryl Fontaine, 31 years old, 2 kids, husband gone, no mechanical experience whatsoever. She walked in asking if Arthur needed a receptionist. Arthur told her he didn't need a receptionist, but he did need someone with enough patience to learn things from scratch. And that turned out to be Cheryl. She worked for him for 9 years. She could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded by the time she left. 1989, a Vietnam veteran named Raymond Cho, 62 years old, who showed up one October morning and sat in the parking lot in his truck for 4 hours before coming inside. Arthur wrote he wasn't ready to ask for anything. I went out and invited him in for coffee. Sometimes that's all it takes, just someone who doesn't make you do the asking. The entries went on, through the 90s and into the 2000s and beyond. 53 people in total, each one documented with the same patient, non-judgmental detail. Arthur never editorialized. He never called anyone a success story. He never used the word redemption. He just wrote what happened, what the person needed, what he offered, and what came next. Cole had to stop reading somewhere around the 40th entry because his vision was doing something unreliable, and he was not a man who permitted himself that particular kind of unreliability in anything approaching a public space, even an empty one. He set the notebook down. He sat back. He understood now why the lock had been oiled, why the shop was preserved, why the letter said his name. He understood the scale of what Arthur Whitmore had done here, not just the 40 years of it, but the final act, the careful, deliberate architecture of leaving this place, not to a relative, not to a preservation society, not to anyone who would turn it into a museum or sell off the bikes, but to a man on a motorcycle who stopped on a highway 12 years ago and spent 40 minutes in the cold helping a stranger. Cole stood up and walked back through the shop. He looked at the panhead. He looked at the workbench with a shovelhead engine laid out mid-repair. He looked at the tool wall with its pegboard outlines. Then he heard a vehicle pull into the parking lot outside. He walked to the front window and looked through a gap in the boarding. Victor Harlan's car, 2 other vehicles behind it. Victor stood in the parking lot with his arms crossed, looking at the building, the same way he had looked at Cole in the auction parking lot, with the particular patience of someone who was deciding how much trouble something was going to be. Cole didn't move from the window for a moment. Then he turned around, walked back to the office, picked up Arthur Whitmore's letter, folded it carefully, and put it in his chest pocket. He walked to the front door, unlocked it from the inside, and stepped out. Victor looked up. If he was surprised, he didn't show it. Thought you'd be in there a while longer, Victor said. Most people spend their first hour in a new acquisition just standing around feeling overwhelmed. I'm done feeling overwhelmed, Cole said. Is that right? Victor smiled in a way that didn't reach anything above his chin. You know what's in there, I assume, the collection alone. You understand what those 3 motorcycles are worth. I do. And you know what the liens look like, what the legal situation actually requires, what it's going to cost you to clear a title assuming you can even do it, which is a significant assumption. Victor paused. I want to make this easy for you, Cole. Can I call you Cole? You can call me whatever you want. Doesn't change anything. I'll give you $40,000, Victor said. Today, cash equivalent. For the property and the collection as is, you walk out of this with $40,000 in your pocket and none of the headaches, and you go build something somewhere else. $40,000 is not a number to dismiss when you're living where you're living. Cole looked at him. How do you know where I'm living? Victor shrugged, which was the most honest thing he'd done since arriving. I do my research. Then do some more research, Cole said, and find out what this place was before you decided to put a number on it. He went back inside and locked the door. He stood in the quiet of the preserve shop with the letter against his chest and the smell of engine oil and old leather around him. And he thought about a Tuesday in October on Highway 93 and an old man in a truck and 40 minutes in the cold that he had forgotten and Arthur Whitmore had never forgotten once. He walked back to the strongbox. He picked up the next journal. He sat down in the cracked vinyl chair and he started reading. He read through the night. That wasn't a metaphor or an exaggeration. Cole Dawson sat in Arthur Whitmore's cracked vinyl chair with the composition notebook spread across the desk in front of him, and he read until the thin light coming through the gaps in the boarded windows shifted from gray to gold, which told him it was morning, which meant he had been in that chair for somewhere between 12 and 14 hours without sleeping. I didn't feel tired. He felt something else entirely, something he didn't have a clean word for, a kind of weight that wasn't oppressive but was enormous. The way a responsibility feels when you first understand its actual dimensions and realize that the thing you agreed to is both larger and more important than you initially calculated. The journals documented 53 people across 40 years. By the time Cole finished the last one, he knew all 53 names. He knew their circumstances. He knew what Arthur had offered each of them and what each of them had done with it. He knew which ones had struggled and which ones had found their footing and which ones Arthur had simply lost track of after a while, not because he stopped caring, but because sometimes people move forward, and the moving forward is the whole point, and you don't need to keep watching after that. He set the final notebook down on the desk and pressed both hands flat against the surface and breathed. 53 people. Not charity cases, not projects. People who arrived at some low point with some version of nothing and left with a skill, a reference, a belief that someone visible and real thought they were worth the investment of time and patience. Arthur never asked for anything back. He never made anyone feel like a burden. He just opened the door and handed them a wrench and said, essentially, let's see what you can do. Cole thought about his own name on that list. Not written in the notebooks, Arthur had been clear that Cole was a different kind of choice, a forward-looking one, rather than a retrospective account. But Cole understood now that in Arthur's mind, he had always been on that list. The old man had just been patient enough to wait for the right moment to make it official. His phone buzzed on the desk beside him. A text from Mrs. Guerrero. It said, "You didn't come home last night. Are you dead or just stupid?" He typed back, "Neither. Working. I'll explain later." She replied, "In less than 10 seconds, I made breakfast. Come eat before I get to the birds." He looked around the office, at the strongbox, at the notebooks, at the letter still folded in his chest pocket. Then he picked up the first journal again, opened it to the front page, and read the first line one more time. Arthur had written, "This shop is not mine. I am just the person who happens to be here right now, taking care of it until the right person arrives." Cole closed the notebook, stacked them carefully back in the strongbox, and locked it. He put the key on his key ring next to the 2 brass building keys. Then he stood up, put on his jacket, and walked out of the office, through the showroom, past the 3 motorcycles and the organized tool wall, and the unfinished shovelhead engine, and out the front door. He drove to Mrs. Guerrero's. She put a plate of eggs and toast in front of him before he was fully seated, which was her way of communicating that she had been worried and was relieved and didn't intend to say either of those things directly. Cole ate without speaking for a few minutes. She sat across from him with her coffee and watched him the way she always watched him, without pity, without judgment. With the particular patience of a woman who had outlived 2 husbands and raised 4 children, and understood that people process things at their own speed, and your job was just to stay in the room. "The Whitmore shop," he said finally. She looked at him over her coffee cup. "You know it," he said. "I know every building in this town," she said. "I've been here 61 years. "Arthur Whitmore," Cole said. "Did you know him?" Something crossed her face. Not grief, exactly the kind of settled, completed feeling that comes with grief that has had enough time to find its place. "Arthur Whitmore taught my nephew how to rebuild a carburetor in 1984, she said. "My nephew was 22 and had just gotten out of county jail, and nobody would hire him. And Arthur gave him 8 months of work and a reference letter that helped him get a real job in Billings." She paused. "He died, Arthur, I mean, last March, quietly. The way he did everything." Whoa, put his fork down. "He knew," Cole said, "about you. He never wrote your name, but I think he knew that if I ended up in this town, it might be partly because of where I landed, and I landed here because the only room I could afford was yours." Mrs. Guerrero was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Arthur Whitmore was not a man who left things to chance." "No," Cole said, "he wasn't." He finished his breakfast. He told her about the letter. He told her about the journals. He did not tell her about Victor Harlan yet, because he was still deciding what Victor Harlan was going to mean to this story, and he had learned a long time ago that naming a problem out loud before you understood its shape sometimes gave it more power than it deserved. He drove back to the shop at 9 in the morning and got to work. The first thing he did was document everything. He photographed the 3 motorcycles from every angle: the tool wall, the workbench, the office, the strong box, the journals. He made a written inventory of every tool on the pegboard, cross-referencing against the outlines to identify what was missing. He pulled the shovel head parts from the workbench one by one, identified each one, and wrote down where in the rebuild process Arthur had stopped. The shop was cleaner and better organized than most working shops Cole had been in during his years in the chapter. Arthur had not just preserved it, he had maintained it. Someone had been in this building regularly, oiling locks, keeping the workbench clear of debris, checking on the motorcycles. The tires on all 3 bikes were properly inflated. The fuel had been drained from the tanks, which was the right call for long-term storage, and which meant whoever was maintaining the place actually knew what they were doing. Cole was on his knees, examining the underside of the panhead when the front door opened. He stood up. A woman stood in the doorway, late 50s, maybe 60, with close-cut silver hair and work boots that had clearly seen actual work. She looked at Cole with an expression that was evaluating rather than hostile, the look of someone deciding whether to continue the conversation or turn around. "You're Cole Dawson," she said, "not a question." "That's right. I'm Margaret Tillis," she said. "I've been looking after this place since Arthur passed, oiling the locks, checking the bikes, keeping the dust from getting completely out of hand." She walked in and let the door close behind her. "Arthur told me someone would come. He said I'd know when they did because they'd have the keys and they wouldn't look like they were doing me any favors by showing up." "How long have you been maintaining it?" "About 14 months, she said. "Arthur made arrangements with me before he went. He was very specific. He said, don't let anyone in, don't let anyone pressure you into opening the place up early, and when someone comes with the keys, show them the back storage room." Cole looked at her. "There's a back storage room behind the false panel in the office closet," she said without any particular drama, the way people deliver information they have been holding for a while and are relieved to finally hand off. He followed her to the office. She went to the closet in the back corner, reached past a hanging coat and a shelf of old shop manuals impressed on the back wall. The panel swung inward on a simple hinge. Beyond it was a room about the size of a large bathroom, metal shelving on 3 walls, floor to ceiling, and on those shelves, organized with the same meticulous care as everything else in the shop, were boxes. Cole stepped in. He pulled the nearest box open. Restoration parts. No S, new old stock. Harley Davidson components still in original packaging, some of them dating back to the 1960s. Carburetor kits, primary chain cases, ignition components, gasket sets for engines that hadn't been manufactured in 30 years. Cole recognized the value immediately, and his brain did the rough math, and the rough math made him go very still. "How many boxes?" he said. 47, Margaret said from the doorway. Arthur spent 30 years collecting them. He said the right person would know what to do with them. Cole stood in the middle of that room for a moment with his hands at his sides. Then he said, Victor Harlan doesn't know about this room. Nobody does, Margaret said, except me, and now you. Cole looked at the shelving. He looked at the carefully labeled boxes. He thought about Victor standing in the parking lot with his arms crossed and his particular kind of patient money-back confidence. He thought about the $40,000 offer and the knowing where Cole was living and the business card he still hadn't thrown away. He's going to come back, Cole said. I know, Margaret said. He's going to bring lawyers. I know that too. What do you know about the title situation, Cole said. The liens, the contested estate. Margaret came into the room properly and leaned against the shelving with her arms crossed. Arthur had a son, she said, Denny Whitmore. He left Red Valley when he was 19 and Arthur didn't hear from him for 30 years. When Arthur was dying, he tried to reach out. Denny came back for about 4 days, took one look at the shop and decided he wanted to sell it. Arthur was still alive, and Denny was already contacting real estate people. Victor Harlan. Victor Harlan, she confirmed. Arthur changed his will as soon as Denny showed up. He removed Denny completely and set up the estate to go into county holding, which is why it ended up at auction. The liens are real but manageable municipal code violations that accumulated over the years of the building being unoccupied. Unpaid business licensing fees, property tax deferrals that Arthur arranged specifically to keep the estate in limbo long enough. Long enough for me to find it, Cole said. Long enough for whoever was supposed to find it, Margaret said. Arthur had faith in the process. I thought he was being overly optimistic, honestly. But here you are. Cole looked at her. And Denny. Denny is still in contact with Victor Harlan, she said. Denny believes he has a claim to this property through the original will before Arthur changed it. Victor is financing Denny's legal challenge because Victor wants the collection. They're planning to file a contest of the estate in county court. She paused. They filed it actually 2 weeks ago. Cole went very still. 2 weeks ago, he repeated. The filing doesn't invalidate your purchase, Margaret said quickly. The auction was legitimate. The county clerk certified the title transfer. But a probate challenge can freeze your ability to develop or significantly alter the property while it's being contested, depending on how the judge rules on the preliminary injunction they were going to request. You know a lot about this, Cole said. Arthur made sure I did, she said. He paid for me to consult with a property attorney in Missoula. He said whoever came through that door was going to need all the information they could get as fast as possible, and he didn't want them going in blind. Cole pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and looked at the ceiling of the back storage room for a moment. The morning had already contained more information than most weeks of his life. He was tired in a specific way, not the exhausted bones tired of physical work, but the particular fatigue of a person whose understanding of a situation keeps expanding faster than they can integrate it. How long do I have before the injunction hearing, he said. The filing requests a hearing within 30 days, Margaret said. That means you have somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks before a judge decides whether to freeze your operations. Operations, Cole said almost to himself. He looked around the room. I don't have operations yet. No, Margaret agreed, but you need to have them before that hearing or you walk in there with nothing to defend. She left him alone in the storage room after that, which was the right call. Cole spent another hour in there methodically going through boxes, not counting value, but understanding inventory, what he had, what it could do, what it meant in the larger context of everything Arthur had documented in those journals. By the time he emerged, he had a rough shape in his mind, not a plan yet. Plans required resources he didn't have, but a shape, a direction. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. He answered. Mr. Dawson. The voice was young male carrying the careful neutrality of someone who has rehearsed what they're going to say. My name is Denny Whitmore. I think we should talk. Cole said nothing. I know you bought the property, Denny continued. I know about the auction. I'm not calling to threaten you or anything like that. I just think there's a situation here that could be resolved in a way that works for both of us if we talk like reasonable adults before lawyers make everything expensive. Where did you get this number? Cole said. A pause. Mr. Harlan has resources. I'm sure he does, Cole said. What do you want, Denny? I want what's mine, Denny said. And there it was, the flat, direct, uncomplicated self-interest under the rehearsed friendliness. My father built that shop. That collection is a family asset. I'm willing to be reasonable about how we divide things, but I'm not willing to walk away from my inheritance because my father made some decisions at the end of his life when he wasn't entirely himself. Your father was entirely himself, Cole said. More himself than most people ever get the chance to be. Another pause, longer this time. You read his journals. I did. Then you know he wasn't a perfect man, Denny said. He was there for every stranger who walked through his door and not there for the people who actually needed him. That landed differently than Denny probably intended it to. Cole heard the wound in it, not manufactured, not lawyer coached. Real. A real old hurt, speaking in the voice of a justification. I'm not going to pretend I know what it was like to be your father's on, Cole said. But I know what he built here, and I know why he built it, and I know what it would mean to let Victor Harlan tear it down and sell off the parts. Victor isn't going to tear anything down, Denny said with a flash of something defensive slightly too quick. He's a businessman. He'll preserve what has value. He'll preserve what he can sell, Cole said. That's not the same thing. Silence on the line. I'm asking you to be reasonable, Denny said finally. I am being reasonable, Cole said. I'm just not being agreeable. There's a difference. He ended the call. He stood in the showroom between the 3 motorcycles and the organized tool wall and the unfinished shovelhead, and he felt the full weight of what he had stepped into settle on him properly for the first time. I had $13 worth of legal claim to a property that a well-funded real estate developer and a son with a genuine grievance were planning to challenge in court within the next month. He had no money for lawyers. He had no business history. He had a criminal-adjacent reputation in a community where reputation mattered. And he had a dead man's journals and a storage room full of vintage motorcycle parts and a letter in his chest pocket from someone who had believed in him for reasons that still felt more dream than fact. He also had Margaret Tillis, who knew more about the situation than she'd had any obligation to learn. He called her. I need to know who Arthur trusted, he said when she picked up. Not just you, people in town, people who understood what this shop was and what he was trying to do here. Why, she said. Because I can't fight a legal challenge alone, and I can't rebuild this place alone, and I don't have money for either, Cole said. What I have is this building and what's in it, and what Arthur spent 40 years doing with it. If there are people in this town who understood that, then I need to find them. Margaret was quiet for a moment. There's a man named Raymond Cho, she said. He lives on the east side of town. He was one of Arthur's first. I know his name, Cole said. He's in the journals. He's 74 years old and he comes to the shop twice a year to sit in the parking lot and drink a coffee, Margaret said. He never goes inside, he just sits there. I used to watch him from across the street and wonder what he was thinking about. Cole didn't wonder. He had read Raymond's entry. He knew exactly what the man was thinking about. Who else, he said. There's a woman named Cheryl Fontaine. She goes by Cheryl Banks. Now she runs the community center on Mill Street. She worked for Arthur in the 90s. She's been quietly making sure the county code enforcement people didn't condemn the building while the estate was in limbo. Margaret paused. And there's a younger man, about your age. His name is Marcus Webb. He never worked for Arthur directly, but Arthur wrote him a reference letter when Marcus was trying to get a journeyman mechanic certification, and the licensing board gave him trouble because of his record. Does Marcus know Arthur wrote the letter? Cole said. Arthur never told anyone what he did for them, Margaret said. That was the rule. He did it, and he let it go, and he never asked for anything back, and he never mentioned it again. Cole thought about that. 53 people who probably didn't know the full shape of what Arthur had given them. People who thought they had gotten a job or a reference or a skill, not understanding that someone had been paying attention to their lives with a kind of care they might not have known to look for. How do I find Marcus Webb? Cole said. He works at the auto parts store on Front Street, Margaret said. He opens at 7. He's been there 6 years. Cole looked at his watch. It was just past noon. I'll go today, he said. Cole, she paused. Before you start building something, you should know that Victor Harlan is not the kind of man who backs down because things get complicated. He's the kind of man who gets more serious when they do. I know men like Victor, Cole said. He has lawyers, she said. Good ones. I know, Cole said. But Arthur had 40 years of people, and I'm starting to think that might be worth more. He hung up and stood in the quiet of the shop. 3 vintage motorcycles, 47 boxes of irreplaceable parts, 7 composition notebooks, a false panel in a closet, an old man's faith, a dead man's letter, and a legal clock running down to 30 days. Cole picked up the shovel-head engine's top end from the workbench, turned it over in his hands once, and set it back down in exactly the position Arthur had left it. Then he walked out the front door, got in his truck, and drove to Front Street. He found the auto parts store without any trouble. The man behind the counter was about Cole's height, broader through the shoulders, with the particular stillness of someone who had spent years learning to manage their own energy carefully. He looked up when Cole came in. He didn't say anything. He just waited. "Marcus Webb," Cole said. "Depends on who's asking," the man said. "Not hostile, just direct." "My name's Cole Dawson," Cole said. "I bought the Whitmore shop yesterday." Marcus stared at him for 3 full seconds. "You're serious," Marcus said. "Completely." Marcus leaned both forearms on the counter. "The auction was yesterday and you're already here." "I read the journals last night," Cole said. "I read Arthur Whitmore's journals, all of them. Your name is in there." Something moved across Marcus Webb's face that was too quick and too complicated to identify cleanly. He straightened up from the counter. He looked at the wall behind the Cole for a moment. "Arthur wrote about people," he said. "He documented everyone he ever helped," Cole said. "Every person, every circumstance, what he gave them, and what they did with it. 40 years of it, 53 people." Marcus was quiet. "He wrote about the reference letter," Cole said. "He wrote about the licensing board. He never told you, did he?" "I didn't know it was from him," Marcus said slowly. "I thought it was from my supervisor at the time. I only found out it was from Arthur about a year ago when I ran into someone who'd worked for him and mentioned it in passing." He paused. "I went to the shop to thank him. It was boarded up. Someone told me he'd died." Cole waited. "I've been thinking about that ever since," Marcus said. "Almost a year. Thinking about how I never got to say it." "Then come say it now," Cole said. "Come to the shop. Help me figure out what we're doing with all, because I have 30 days before a legal challenge potentially shuts me down, before I can even start, and I need people who understand what that shop was and what it should be." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "You just walked in here and asked me that," he said. "You don't know me." "Arthur knew you," Cole said. "That's a good enough start." Another long moment. Then Marcus reached under the counter and pulled out his jacket. "My shift ends at 3, he said. "I'll be there at 3:15. Cole nodded. He turned to leave. "Dawson," Marcus called after him. Cole stopped. "The shovel head on the workbench," Marcus said. "The top end Arthur was rebuilding. I know that engine. Arthur let me work on it with him twice, back when I was first learning. He said he was saving it for something special." He paused. "Did he say anything in those journals about what the engine was for?" Cole turned around. "He wrote one line about it," Cole said. "He said the shovel head goes to whoever finishes it. They'll know who they are." Marcus stared at him. Cole left. He drove 3 more stops that afternoon. He found Cheryl Banks at the community center on Mill Street where she was organizing tables for an evening event. She listened to him for 4 minutes without interrupting, then said, "Tell me what you need and when you need it." He found Raymond Cho through Margaret's directions sitting in his kitchen with a cup of tea, and when Cole told him what he was doing, the old man was quiet for such a long time that Cole thought he might have to start over. Then Raymond said, "Arthur would have wanted someone to make noise. He was always too quiet about it himself. What are we doing?" By 5 o'clock, Cole had 4 people besides himself who understood what the shop was and what it should be, and who were willing to show up. It wasn't an army, but it was a start. He drove back to the shop as the light was dropping and sat on the front step and looked at the parking lot and thought about Victor Harlan's business card in his pocket, and Denny Whitmore's voice on the phone, and 30 days and a judge and a legal system that ran on money. And he thought about Arthur's 53 people and a storage room full of irreplaceable parts, and a dead man who had oiled locks and held his breath for years waiting for the right person to arrive. His phone rang again. Unknown number. He picked it up. A man's voice different from Denny older, with the even unhurried cadence of someone accustomed to being listened to. "Mr. Dawson, my name is Paul Ridley. I represent Victor Harlan Properties. I wanted to be the first to let you know that we filed for an emergency injunction this afternoon, which moves the hearing timeline from 30 days to 10. Cole sat very still on the front step. 10 days, he said. 10 days, Paul Ridley said. I'm only calling because Mr. Harlan genuinely believes a negotiated solution is better for everyone, and he wanted you to have the information before it becomes public record tomorrow morning. 40,000 is still on the table. It would be the sensible choice. Cole looked at the door of the shop behind him. Tell Mr. Harlan, Cole said, that sensible was never really my strong suit. He hung up. 10 days. He stood up, went inside, locked the door behind him, and went back to the strongbox. He opened it. He took out all 7 journals and arranged them across the workbench in chronological order. Then he picked up his phone and called Margaret. They moved the hearing to 10 days, he said when she answered. A pause. Then her voice came back steady and certain. Then we move faster. 10 days. Margaret said those 2 words back to him on the phone, and then they both sat in the particular silence of people who understand that the timeline just became the enemy. Cole stayed on the line without speaking for a moment, turning the phone in his hand, looking at Arthur's 7 journals laid out across the workbench in chronological order. Margaret, he said, Arthur's property attorney in Missoula, the one he paid to brief you. Is that person still reachable? Her name is Sandra Okafor, Margaret said. She's good. Arthur trusted her completely. Can you call her tonight, right now, if possible? It's past 6. I know what time it is, Cole said. Call her anyway. He heard Margaret pull a breath. All right. And tell everyone else to be at the shop tomorrow morning at 7, Cole said. Marcus, Raymond, Cheryl, anyone else you think should be there. We're done moving slowly. He hung up and looked at the journals. 10 days was not enough time to do what Arthur had spent 40 years building. Cole understood that clearly. But 10 days might be enough time to prove to a judge that what existed here was worth protecting, that this was not a vacant property sitting on speculative land value, but something with documented history, documented purpose, documented community impact. Something that a court could look at and understand as a going concern rather than an abandoned building waiting for development. The problem was that Cole had no legal standing to operate yet. The title transfer was certified, but the liens weren't cleared, which meant he couldn't open the shop commercially, couldn't hire anyone, officially couldn't represent himself to the court as running an active business. He was a man who owned a building he couldn't fully use, yet fighting a legal challenge from a man who had money and lawyers, and a son with a blood claim, and 10 days to make everything complicated. He sat on the workbench and thought about that for a while. Then he picked up his phone and made a call he had been putting off for 2 days. The number rang 4 times. 5. He was about to hang up when the line connected and a man's voice came through, rough and familiar, in the way of voices that belonged to people you had known during a specific period of your life and hadn't spoken to in years. Cole Dawson, the voice said, not surprised exactly, more like a man who had been expecting a call and had given up expecting it and was now slightly thrown by its actual arrival. I figured you were dead or in Canada. Neither, Cole said. How are you, Hector? Same as always, Hector Reyes said. Too old for most of what I'm doing. You I need something, Cole said, and I need it fast. Hector had been the chapter's unofficial legal resource for 11 years. Not a lawyer himself, but a man who knew lawyers, who understood how legal mechanisms worked, who had spent enough time watching other people's situations deteriorate from lack of information that he had made himself an expert in the basic architecture of property law and estate disputes purely by necessity. Cole had seen him walk into rooms where people thought they had no options and walk out 30 minutes later with a list of 3. He was also one of the handful of people in Cole's former life who had never held a departure against him. Cole spent 15 minutes laying out the situation. Hector listened without interrupting, which was his habit. When Cole finished, there was a brief silence. The emergency injunction is a pressure tactic, Hector said. They move the timeline because they want you rattled and making bad decisions. If they actually expected to win on the merits, they'd let it play out at 30 days. 10 days means they're not confident. That's somewhat reassuring, Cole said. Somewhat is right because the judge still has to rule, Hector said. Who's your attorney? I don't have one. Silence. Cole, I know. You walked into a contested estate situation with no legal representation, Hector said with the particular patience of a man who was deciding not to say the obvious thing. You need Sandra Okafor up to speed tonight. Margaret already knows her. She's calling her now. Good. Tell Sandra that the timeline compression is a provocation, not a strength. A good attorney will file for a continuance on the grounds of inadequate notice, and she'll probably get it, which buys you back the 30 days. He paused. The more important question is what you're going to show the court when the hearing actually happens. What's your documentation? 7 composition notebooks documenting 40 years of community impact, Cole said. Photographs, business records, employee accounts, and a storage room full of authenticated vintage parts that establishes the collection as a working inventory, not just a static display. That's actually something, Hector said. That's more than something, and what you need is declarations, written statements from the people Arthur helped testifying to the shop's history and purpose. Signed, dated, filed with the court before the hearing. Even if you only get 5 or 6, it establishes that this place had a function beyond property value. I have names, Cole said. Arthur documented everyone. Then start calling people, Hector said. Tonight, some of them won't want to, some of them will have moved on and won't want to revisit it, but some of them will show up. He paused again. Does Denny Whitmore actually have a legal claim? Arthur changed his will after Denny showed up trying to sell the property while Arthur was still alive, Cole said. So we're looking at a will contest on grounds of incapacity or undue influence, combined with a probate challenge to the estate's title transfer, Hector said. Who was Arthur's physician in the final months? Cole stopped. I don't know. Find out, Hector said. If Arthur's doctor can attest to his mental competency in the period when he changed the will, that's the foundation of Denny's argument, destroyed before it starts. A brief pause. This is winnable, Cole. It's not comfortable and it's not going to be cheap, but it's winnable. You're not fighting a legal case. You're fighting Victor Harlan's money and Victor Harlan's patience. The way you beat that is by being something he can't buy off or outlast. Which is what, Cole said. Right, Hector said simply. You just be right, and you get enough people in that room who can say it clearly. Cole thanked him and hung up. He sat in the dark of the shop for a moment. He'd been sitting in varying degrees of dark for 2 days now, his eyes adjusting each time, which felt like a metaphor. He didn't have the energy to fully develop. And then he picked up Arthur's first journal and opened it to the section on Daniel Reeves, the first person documented. The entry contained an address in Billings, an old address probably, but a starting point. He started making calls. He worked the phone for 3 hours straight, going through the journals methodically, finding contact information or next of kin information or professional information that could be cross-referenced into a current phone number. He reached 9 people that night. 3 didn't answer. 2 declined immediately, politely, but clearly the kind of people who had built new lives at some distance from their difficult past and didn't want the distance collapsed. One man answered and was silent for so long after Cole explained who he was and why he was calling that. Cole thought the line had dropped, and then the man said, "Give me your address. I'll be there by morning." That was Daniel Reeves. He called from Billings at 9:15 at night, 61 years old now, and said he would drive through the night to Red Valley because Arthur Whitmore had taught him how to rebuild a transmission and also how to believe that a man's worst year didn't have to be the thing that defined every year after it, and if someone needed a signed statement saying so, Daniel Reeves would sign it, standing on the courthouse steps if necessary. The other 5 people Cole reached in that night each said some version of yes. The language varied. The certainty didn't. By the time Cole locked the shop and drove back to Mrs. Guerrero's, it was past midnight. He fell asleep sitting on the edge of his bed with his boots still on. 7 o'clock came sharp and cold. He was at the shop by 6:45. Margaret arrived at 7:05 with Sandra Okafor on speakerphone from Missoula, walking them through the continuance filing, while simultaneously asking Cole questions about the lie in documentation that he answered by reading directly from the county records he'd found in Arthur's filing cabinet the night before. Sandra was quick and methodical, and she spoke the way competent people speak when they've already thought 3 steps ahead and are bringing everyone else up to speed. The continuance will likely be granted, Sandra said. Ridley's emergency filing is technically procedurally sound, but the compressed timeline is aggressive enough that most judges will push back. I'll file this morning. You should assume you have your 30 days back by afternoon. And the will contest, Cole said. Tell me about Arthur's physician, Sandra said. I'm working on that, Cole said. Work faster, she said. That's your foundation. Marcus arrived at 7:20 with 2 coffees and a folder of documents he'd spent the previous night assembling business licenses. He'd researched municipal property records, a printed copy of the county's commercial heritage preservation guidelines that he'd found buried in local government policy archives. He dropped the folder on the workbench beside the journals and said, "Arthur's shop qualifies for heritage status under Section 7 of the County Commercial Code. It's almost never used because nobody ever bothers to apply for it, but it's there." Cole looked at him. Heritage status. It means the county has a vested interest in maintaining the commercial character of the property, Marcus said. It doesn't block development outright, but it requires any significant alteration or change of use to go through a public review process. Victor can't just buy it and flip it. He has to get community approval. "How long does that application take?" Cole said. 30 days to file, 60 days minimum for review, Marcus said. If we get the heritage application in before the injunction hearing, the judge has to factor that into any ruling about operational freezes. Margaret was already on the phone to the county clerk's office. Raymond Cho arrived at 8 with Cheryl Banks, who had driven him because Raymond didn't like driving in the morning. Raymond walked into the shop and stood in the showroom and looked at the 3 motorcycles for a long time without speaking. Then he turned around and said, "I'm going to write you the best declaration you've ever read. I'm going to write it in the language of a man who came here with nothing, and I'm going to make sure every person in that courtroom understands exactly what Arthur Whitmore gave people who had nothing left to give back." Cheryl said, "I'll do the same. And I'm calling the Community Center Board today. We have a formal partnership with the County Employment Services Office. If the shop is designated as an active vocational training site, that adds another layer of protected status that Victor's lawyers are going to have to work around." Cole looked at these 4 people, Margaret on the phone with the county clerk, Marcus cross-referencing heritage preservation law, Raymond already pulling a notepad from his jacket pocket to start his declaration, Cheryl calculating protective designations, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope exactly, something more specific than hope. The feeling of watching a machine that had been sitting still for too long begin to move. Daniel Reeves arrived at 9:30 road-worn from the overnight drive, and the first thing he did after shaking Cole's hand was walk to the workbench and look at the shovelhead engine laid out in Arthur's sequence and say he never finished it. "He left it for whoever would," Cole said. Daniel touched the case with one hand very briefly. "He taught me on a shovelhead," he said, 1987. "I didn't know anything. I mean anything. I barely knew which end of a wrench to hold. He never made me feel stupid about that. He just started from the beginning and kept going." "Write that down," Cole said. "Write exactly that the way you just said it. That's your declaration." By noon, the shop had become something Cole hadn't planned or scheduled, but which felt entirely natural, a working space. Not commercially open, not officially operational, but alive with the specific energy of people who were doing something that mattered. Marcus and Daniel were examining the NOS parts inventory in the back storage room, cataloging the components in preparation for the heritage application documentation. Raymond was at Arthur's desk in the office, writing steadily in the careful long hand of a man who had spent a lifetime choosing his words. Cheryl was on her phone coordinating with the county employment office. Margaret was drafting the heritage designation application from a template Sandra had emailed from Missoula. And Cole was at the workbench. He hadn't planned to start on the shovelhead. He had more pressing things to do. But his hands went to it the way hands go to things they understand instinctively. And once he had the first component in his hand and was examining it, the work took over the way it always had, the clean, uncomplicated language of engines, where every problem had a correct solution, and every solution could be tested immediately and either worked or didn't. He had been at it for about an hour when the front door opened and Denny Whitmore walked in. Cole didn't look up from the workbench immediately. He knew it was Denny because he heard Margaret's sharp intake of breath from the office doorway, and he heard a voice say, "I tried calling first," in the same tone he'd heard on the phone 2 days ago, performing reasonableness, while something harder ran underneath it. Cole set down the component he was holding and turned around. Denny Whitmore was 52, maybe 53. He had the lean, angular look of Arthur's photographs, but the eyes were different. Where Arthur's journals described a man who watched people with interest and patience, Denny watched the room with calculation, cataloging exits and threats, the way people do when they've spent their lives expecting things to go sideways. He looked at Marcus and Daniel in the doorway of the storage room. He looked at Cheryl at the far end of the space. He looked at the motorcycles. His jaw tightened slightly when he saw the panhead, which told Cole that Denny recognized it and knew its value. Then he looked at Cole. "You've been busy," Denny said. "I have," Cole said. "Who are all these people? People who knew your father," Cole said. Denny's eyes moved across the room again. Something shifted in his expression, not regret, not exactly, but an involuntary adjustment, the way a face moves when information arrives that it wasn't prepared for. "My father didn't have friends," Denny said. "He had projects." "That's not what they'd say," Cole said. "What would they say?" "Read the journals," Cole said. "They're in the office." Denny looked at the office doorway. Raymond was visible inside writing. Denny didn't move toward it. "I'm not the villain here," Denny said, and his voice dropped slightly in a way that made Cole believe him, or believe at least that Denny believed it, which was its own complicated thing. "I grew up watching my father give everything he had to people who came through that door and had nothing left for the people who actually lived with him. I'm not a bad person for thinking I deserve something from what he built." Cole waited a moment before answering. "No," he said. "You're not a bad person for thinking that. What you're doing is something else." "What am I doing?" "You're letting Victor Harlan use your grief to make him money," Cole said. "That's what's happening here, Denny. He's not financing your legal challenge because he cares about your inheritance. He's financing it because those 3 motorcycles in this room are worth somewhere between $400,000 and $700,000 to the right buyers, and he wants them. You're the mechanism. That's all." Denny's face went through something quick and complicated. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know Victor Harlan walked up to me in the auction parking lot before my signature was dry and offered me $40,000 for a collection worth 10 times that," Cole said. "I know his lawyer filed for an emergency injunction the same afternoon I turned him down. I know he had my home address before I'd lived here a year. Victor Harlan does not do things slowly or politely." Cole looked at him steadily. "What did he promise you?" Silence. "What number did he put in front of you?" Cole said. "Whatever it was, run the math on what he actually stands to make and see what's left over for you." Denny looked at the floor, just for a second, but it was the kind of look that told a story. "Victor promised me 80,000, Denny said quietly. 50 up front, 30 after the property sells." Cole said nothing. "I know," Denny said, and his voice had changed, the rehearsed quality gone something more tired and direct underneath. "I know how that sounds, but 80,000 is not nothing, and I've been fighting my way out of debt for 6 years, and when Victor came to me, I thought..." He stopped, started again. "I thought my father owed me something." "He did," Cole said, "but this isn't it." "Then what is..." Cole turned back to the workbench. He picked up the shovel head component he'd been working with. "Come here," he said. Denny didn't move for a moment. Then he walked to the workbench. Cole set the component down and turned to face him fully. "Your father spent 40 years teaching people skills they didn't have. He gave them the ability to do something with their hands that they could take anywhere. He gave them competency, which is a kind of freedom that nobody can repossess." He paused. "He couldn't do the same thing for you because you left when you were 19 and never came back. That's not blame, that's just what happened. But the inheritance your father left you is not in those motorcycles. It's in what this shop knows how to do." Denny stared at him. "I'm offering you a job," Cole said. "Not charity, not a consolation prize. A job doing whatever you're capable of doing in the place your father built with people who understood what he was trying to create here." The silence that followed was the longest of the morning. "I'm still in a legal agreement with Victor," Denny said finally. "That's a problem you created," Cole said. "It's also a problem you can solve. Talk to a lawyer, not Victor's lawyer, a real one." He looked at him steadily. "Your father trusted that the right people would find their way here. I think he was including you in that, whether he said it or not." Denny looked at the journals in the office, at Raymond writing steadily in his notepad, at the motorcycles, at the shovel head parts laid out in sequence on the workbench. "I need to think," he said. "Think fast," Cole said. "We have a court date." Denny left without another word. Cole watched him go and then turned back to the workbench. His hands were steady. He didn't fully understand why, but they were. What he didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that Victor Harlan had been doing his own research in the days since the auction. Not into the property, but into Cole Dawson. Victor was thorough the way all dangerous people are thorough, And what he had found in Cole's history was a piece of information that was technically public record, but that Cole had spent 3 years hoping nobody in Red Valley would ever connect to his name. Victor's lawyer, Paul Ridley, called Sandra Okafor at 2:15 that afternoon. Sandra called Cole at 2:30. They found the 2019 civil lawsuit, Sandra said. Cole went still. The 2019 civil lawsuit was the last piece of the old life that had followed him out of it. A former chapter associate had filed a civil action claiming Cole had been party to a contract dispute that resulted in the loss of a business. The suit was without merit and had been dismissed, but it had been filed, and it was public record, and its existence was the kind of thing that looked bad on paper, regardless of outcome. They're going to use it to challenge your fitness to operate a commercial establishment, Sandra said. They'll argue that a man with a civil lawsuit in his recent history involving a business dispute should not be granted protected status for a commercial property. The suit was dismissed, Cole said. Dismissed without prejudice, Sandra said, which means technically it could be refiled. Ridley knows that. He's going to wave that flag in front of the judge and hope it creates enough doubt. Cole pressed his hand flat against the workbench and breathed. Can they make that argument stick, he said. On its own, no, Sandra said. But combined with the estate challenge and the lien situation, it adds weight. It's not about legal merit. It's about creating a picture of instability. Victor wants the judge to see Cole Dawson as a risk and see Victor Harlan Properties as a stable, established entity. He's building a narrative. Cole looked around the shop, at the people working in it, at Arthur's journals, at the shovel head. Then we build a better one, he said. Cole, how many of the declarations do we have so far? A pause. Margaret has 3 completed. Raymond should be done by tonight. That's 4. We need 10, Cole said. I'll get 10 by tomorrow morning. And I need Arthur's physician's name. I'm still trying to locate. Margaret knows everyone in this town, Cole said. I'll ask her directly. He hung up and walked to the office doorway. Raymond looked up from his writing. Cole said, Raymond, Arthur's doctor. Do you know who it was? Raymond set down his pen. Dr. Carol Mestre, he said without hesitation. She has a practice on Fielding Street. She's been in Red Valley 35 years. She treated Arthur for the last 8 of them. Did you know her well? She's the reason I'm still alive, Raymond said simply. She caught a cardiac issue I didn't know I had 4 years ago. Arthur referred me to her. Cole looked at him. Call her, he said, right now. Tell her what's happening and ask if she'll speak to the court about Arthur's mental competency in the final months. Raymond had his phone out before Cole finished the sentence. Cole went back to the workbench. He looked at the shovel head. He picked up the component he'd set down when Denny arrived, turned it in his hands, and kept working. His phone buzzed 40 minutes later. A text from a number he didn't recognize. It said, I talked to a real lawyer this afternoon. Victor's agreement with me has problems. I'm thinking about what you said. D. Cole read it twice, set the phone down, picked up his wrench. At 4:15, Sandra called back. The continuance was granted, she said. You have your 30 days. Cole exhaled slowly. The heritage designation application, he said. Filed her, Sandra said. Marcus's research was solid. The county clerk accepted it. Review process starts in 60 days, which means any operational freeze Victor tries to get would be in direct conflict with an active heritage review. Good, Cole said. Cole, Sandra paused. Dr. Mestre called me directly. She said she not only remembers Arthur clearly in his final months, she has contemporaneous clinical notes documenting his cognitive sharpness through the day he changed his will. She said, and I'm quoting directly, Arthur Whitmore was one of the clearest thinking people I've ever treated, and I will say that under oath in any court in this state. Cole put the wrench down. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. He stood at Arthur's workbench in Arthur's shop with Arthur's letter still folded in his chest pocket, and he felt something move through him that was large and quiet and difficult to name. Something that had to do with the fact that a man who had died in March in a chair in the next room had built something so carefully, so patiently, so deliberately, that it was still protecting itself from the inside out months after he was gone. Get her declaration filed, Cole said when he trusted his voice again. Already in process, Sandra said. He hung up. Marcus appeared from the storage room. The parts inventory is done, he said. 47 boxes, authenticated components spanning 1958 to 1984. Replacement value conservatively is around $340,000. That's the kind of number that changes a heritage application from a formality to a serious designation request. Daniel Reeves came through from the other side of the shop, his declaration printed and signed. "Where do you want this?" he said. "On the desk in the office," Cole said. "Stack it with Raymond's." "Raymond just finished," Cheryl said from the office doorway. She was holding a sheet of paper with an expression on her face that told Cole Raymond's declaration was not a neutral document. "You should read it before we file it." Cole walked into the office. Raymond was capping his pen. Cole picked up the handwritten pages from the desk and read. Raymond Cho had written 4 pages about Arthur Whitmore in the handwriting of a man who took words seriously. He wrote about sitting in that truck in the parking lot for 4 hours in October 1998. He wrote about the coffee. He wrote about the 9 months he had worked in the shop, learning to use his hands again, after years of feeling like his hands weren't worth using. He wrote about leaving and what he'd built afterward, and how Arthur never once asked him to be grateful, never mentioned the debt, never brought up the parking lot or the 4 hours or any of it. Just handed him a key and showed him how to take apart an engine and let him be a man doing work instead of a veteran with a history. At the bottom of the last page, he had written one sentence in slightly larger script than the rest, and Arthur Whitmore did not save me. He stood close enough that I could save myself. Cole set the pages back on the desk. He looked at Raymond, who was watching him with the quiet patience of someone who had written something honest and was waiting to see if it landed. "That's the one," Cole said. "That's the center of everything we're going to tell that judge." Raymond nodded once. Outside, a vehicle pulled into the parking lot. Cole heard it and felt the small tightening that had become automatic, now the reflex of a man who had spent days fielding unexpected arrivals. He went to the front and looked. It wasn't Victor's car. It wasn't Denny's. It was a pickup truck. He didn't recognize Montana plates, and when the door opened, the man who got out was in his mid-30s wearing work clothes, and he stood in the parking lot looking at the building with an expression that Cole recognized immediately because he'd worn it himself 2 days ago, the expression of someone arriving somewhere they've been trying to get to for a long time. The man came to the door and knocked. Cole opened it. "My name's Kevin Garza," the man said. "My father's name was Eddie Garza. Arthur Whitmore hired my dad in 2001. My dad passed away 4 years ago, but before he did, he told me that if anything ever happened to this shop, I should show up." He held up a folded piece of paper. "My dad wrote this when he was sick. He said it was for Arthur, but he never got to give it to him. I think maybe it's for you instead." Cole stepped back and let him in. He took the folded paper and opened it. It was a letter written in the uncertain handwriting of a man fighting illness, addressed to Arthur Whitmore, dated 3 years ago. Cole read the first paragraph and stopped. He handed it to Margaret without saying anything. She read it. Her hand went to her mouth. "What does it say?" Marcus asked from across the room. Margaret lowered the paper. Her voice was steady, but only barely. "It says that Eddie Garza used what Arthur taught him to open his own shop in 2007, and that shop employed 11 people for 14 years, and 3 of those 11 people had prior records and couldn't get work anywhere else. And Eddie never forgot where that started." She paused. "He says Arthur gave him a chance when he had nothing, and he spent his whole life trying to give the same chance to someone else. And he hopes Arthur knows that the thing he started didn't end with one shop." The room was very quiet. Cole looked at the 7 journals on the workbench, at the storage room full of parts, at the motorcycles, at Raymond's declaration and Daniel's signature, and Kevin Garza standing just inside the doorway holding his father's letter. He looked at Arthur's unfinished shovelhead engine laid out in careful sequence on the workbench. He understood something then that he hadn't fully understood until this moment. Arthur hadn't built a shop. He hadn't just helped people. He had started something that had continued to move through the world on its own, through the lives of the people he'd touched, through the businesses they opened, and the people those businesses employed, and the chances those people passed forward to someone else. It wasn't 53 people. It had never been only 53 people. Cole picked up Arthur's first journal. He turned to the first entry. Daniel Reeves, 1987. He looked up at Daniel across the room. "How many people have you employed since you opened in Billings?" Cole said. Daniel blinked. "What?" "Since 1994. For your shop. How many employees?" Daniel thought for a moment. "I don't know exactly. Over 30 years, somewhere around 45 people through the full-time staff. And any of them had records, prior history." "Yeah," Daniel said slowly. Yeah, a few. I always figured that was just what you did. You gave people a fair shot. That's what Arthur gave you, Cole said. Daniel went quiet. Cole turned to Cheryl. The community center. How many vocational programs have you run since you left here? Cheryl looked at him. Cole, how many? She thought about it. Across 12 years of programming, probably around 200 participants, maybe more. Arthur taught you the model, Cole said. You've been running his model for 12 years without calling it that. Cheryl pressed her lips together. Cole turned back to the workbench. He looked at the shovel head. 53 people in the journals. But 53 was just the first generation. The people, those 53, had touched, trained, employed, believed, and passed a chance to that number went far beyond anything Arthur had been able to document. It was the kind of math that made a person go quiet. Cole went quiet for a moment. Then he turned to the room and said, I need everyone to think about who they've helped since Arthur helped them. Anyone they've given a job, a reference, a second chance. I need names, I need contact information if you have it, and I need it by tomorrow morning. He looked at Kevin Garza. That includes your father's employees, the 3 with records. I need those names if you have them. Kevin nodded. I have the records from my dad's shop. I kept everything. Good, Cole said. Then here's what we're going to show that judge. He put his hand flat on Arthur's first journal. We're not going to show him one shop and one man's 40 years. We're going to show him a network. We're going to show him what one person's decision to believe in people actually looks like when you trace it all the way through. Margaret was already opening her laptop. Marcus was on his phone. Raymond picked up his pen again. And Cole turned back to the workbench, picked up his wrench, and kept working on the shovelhead because the engine wasn't going to finish itself, and because Arthur had left it in the middle on purpose, and because some things needed to be completed even when everything else was on fire. The names came in overnight. Cole didn't sleep much. He sat at Arthur's desk with his phone charging beside him and a legal pad in front of him, and every time a text came through or an email arrived in the account Margaret had set up for the project, he wrote down the name and the connection and the details. Kevin Garza had his father's employee records organized in a folder he'd kept in his truck, 14 years of hiring logs, W-2 records, reference letters, going back to the day Eddie Garza opened his shop in 2007. 3 former employees with prior records, all of them now employed elsewhere with their own businesses. Cole called all 3 that night. The first one, a man named Terrence Hill, picked up on the second ring at 11:30 at night, and when Cole explained what he was asking for, Terrence said, Arthur Whitmore's shop. And Cole said yes, and Terrence said, my dad used to say that place was the reason our family didn't fall apart. He talked about it until the day he died. Tell me where to sign. The second one didn't answer. Cole left a message. The third one was a woman named Gloria Santana, who had worked for Eddie Garza for 6 years after getting out of a 2-year sentence for check fraud at 24 years old. She was now 38, running a small bookkeeping operation in Great Falls. She listened to Cole's explanation without interrupting and then said very quietly, I didn't know where it started. I always wondered who Eddie learned that from. The way he hired people. The way he never made you feel like your past was the most interesting thing about you. She paused. I'll write whatever you need. I'll drive there if that helps. A signed declaration by tomorrow afternoon is enough, Cole said. But if you want to come, there's room. She came. By 6 in the morning, Cole had 17 names on his legal pad. Some were direct people Arthur had helped himself in names from the journals. Some were second-generation people that Arthur's people had employed or mentored. 2 were third generation, a young man in Missoula, whose grandfather had been one of Arthur's early apprentices who had passed the skills and the philosophy down through the family, the way some families pass down a trade and some pass down a faith. This family had passed down both simultaneously without ever labeling it as either. Cole stared at that legal pad in the early morning quiet of Arthur's office and felt the weight of it differently than he had the night before. Not as a legal strategy, as a fact. A plain, almost geological fact about what one person's consistent behavior across 4 decades actually produced in the world. Arthur Whitmore had never made a speech. He had never started a foundation or applied for a grant or written an op-ed about second chances. He had just opened a door every morning and handed people a wrench and paid them fairly and written careful notes about their lives in composition notebooks that nobody was supposed to read. And this was the result. Cole put the legal pad down, picked up his wrench, and went back to the shovelhead. He worked on it for an hour before anyone else arrived. The engine was coming together with the particular satisfaction of work that had been left well prepared. Arthur's sequence was logical and clean, each part in the right order for the right reason. The way a good teacher sets up a lesson so that the next step is always obvious to anyone paying attention. Cole found himself talking to Arthur in his head while he worked, which was not something he would have admitted to anyone in the room, but which felt entirely natural in the quiet of 6:30 in the morning with the smell of engine oil and the sound of nothing else. He said things like, "I found the Gloria Santana connection. 3 generations, Arthur, you started something that went 3 generations deep and you never knew. And I had the conversation with Denny. I don't know if it landed. I think some of it landed. And I'm finishing your engine. I want you to know that. Whoever it's for, I'm finishing it." Marcus arrived at 7 with coffee and a printed copy of the Heritage Designation application, fully completed, stamped by the county clerk. He dropped it on the desk and said, "Heritage status is officially under active review. Any operational freeze that Victor gets would now have to go through a Heritage Review Board before it could be enforced. That's not impossible for him to navigate, but it adds 60 days minimum and a public comment period." "A public comment period," Cole said. "Anyone can speak," Marcus said. "The community, local organizations, former employees. The county has to hold at least 2 public sessions before the review board votes." Cole looked at the legal pad with 17 names on it. "Victor has no idea what's about to happen to him," Cole said, not with satisfaction, but with something more sober, the recognition that the machine Arthur had built was bigger and more durable than anyone had calculated, including Arthur himself probably. Sandra called at 8. "Good morning," she said, which was how Sandra indicated that things were going adequately. She used good morning the way some people use could be worse. "I filed Dr. Mestra's declaration this morning alongside Raymond's and Daniel's. The court has accepted all submissions so far. We're now at 7 declarations on record." "I have 17 names," Cole said. "Some of them need more time to prepare written statements, but I can get you 10 more by end of day." A pause. "Cole, 10 more declarations on top of 7 is not a number that Victor's legal team expected." "Good," Cole said. "It's also not a number that a judge is going to ignore," Sandra said. "Ridley's strategy was to paint you as an isolated individual with a problematic history trying to hold onto a property through sentimental attachment. 17 people, 27 people with documented connections to this shop changes that picture entirely." "That's what I'm counting on," Cole said. "There's something else," Sandra said, and her voice shifted slightly in a way that Cole had already learned to pay attention to. Sandra Okafor had 3 tones: efficient information, concerned but manageable, and something you need to sit down for. This was the third one. "Paul Ridley filed a supplementary brief this morning. He's introducing a new argument." Cole stopped what he was doing. "They found the 2019 civil complaint," Sandra said, "which we already knew. But they've now also found a 21 deposition you gave in a federal proceeding related to your former chapter. You weren't a party to that proceeding, you were a witness, but your name is in federal court records associated with an organized crime investigation." Cole's jaw tightened. "The deposition was voluntary," he said. "I cooperated with that investigation specifically because I wanted to put distance between myself and things I had nothing to do with." "I know that," Sandra said, "and the record reflects that. But Ridley isn't arguing that you did anything wrong. He's arguing that your association with the context, your proximity to that investigation, makes you an unsuitable steward for a commercial property with community designation status. It's a character argument, not a legal one. But judges are human beings." Cole pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. "Can you counter it?" he said. "I can," Sandra said. "But I need you to tell me something you haven't told me yet. Why did you cooperate with that federal investigation? What was the thing you refused to do that made you leave the chapter in the first place?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. "Someone got hurt," he said. "A man named Gerald P. Tack. He worked a salvage yard outside of Kalispell, and he made the mistake of getting crossways with some people in the chapter over a debt that wasn't even his. They decided to make an example of him. I was told to participate. I refused." He stopped. Gerald P. Tack was 63 years old, and he had 3 grandchildren, and he had done nothing wrong except exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. "I refused, and I walked out, and 6 months later I called the federal tip line and told them what I knew. Sandra was quiet. You reported them, she said. Yes. And that's documented. It's in the federal records, Cole said. The tip line report, the voluntary deposition, all of it. They used my information alongside 3 other witnesses. 2 chapter members were federally prosecuted. Cole, Sandra said, why didn't you lead with this? Because I didn't want it to be the end of the story, he said. I didn't want to be the man who walked away and then turned around and reported. I just wanted to be somewhere quiet and fix engines. I understand that, Sandra said. But this is the single most important fact in your legal record, and Victor Harlan's team found the deposition without finding the tip report because the tip report is in a different file. If we introduce the tip report, we don't just neutralize their character argument, we reverse it. You're not a man with a problematic organized crime adjacency. You're a man who saw something wrong, refused to participate, and cooperated with federal authorities at personal risk to himself. Cole stared at the workbench. Do it, he said. I'll need the case number, Sandra said. He gave it to her from memory. He had memorized it 3 years ago and never forgotten it the way you memorize things you've decided to live with. After Sandra hung up, Cole stood at the workbench for a full minute without moving. Then he picked up his wrench and got back to work on the shovel head because the engine was the thing he could control right now, and he needed something he could control. Cheryl arrived at 9 with the community center's formal partnership proposal, a document she had drafted overnight with the County Employment Services Office, establishing Whitmore Cycle and Repair as an official vocational training site under the county's Workforce Development Program. The designation came with a modest operational grant, enough to cover basic utility costs for 6 months, and the formal status of a county-partnered institution, which meant any legal challenge to the property's operational status had to go through the County Workforce Development Board as well as the court. Cole read the proposal twice. How did you get this done overnight? I've been on the board of the County Employment Office for 4 years, Cheryl said. I called in 12 years of relationship capital last night. They fast-tracked it because the application was solid and because 2 board members remembered Arthur personally. She looked at him steadily. Arthur spent 40 years building goodwill in this community without ever calling it that. We're spending it now. Cole looked at the partnership proposal. He thought about Arthur sitting in this office, writing careful notes about Cheryl in 1991, 31 years old, 2 kids, incredible mechanical talent, no formal training. He thought about the fact that that woman had just spent an entire night mobilizing a county workforce board on behalf of the place where she first learned to believe she was capable of something. Thank you, Cole said. Don't thank me, Cheryl said. Just don't lose the shop. At 10:30, Victor Harlan arrived in person. No phone call this time. No lawyer ahead of him. Victor walked through the front door of Whitmore's Cycle and Repair alone, which was unusual enough that Cole felt it before he understood what it meant. Victor was a man who traveled with resources. Seeing him alone was like seeing a general show up at the front line without an army, either a gesture of respect or a sign that something had changed. He looked around the shop, at the people working, at the declarations stacked on the desk visible through the office doorway, at the 3 motorcycles. His face was unreadable in the way of people who have practiced unreadable for decades. I heard you brought in outside legal counsel, Victor said. I did, Cole said. Sandra Okafor is good, Victor said. I've seen her work before. She won a heritage designation case in Flathead County 3 years ago that cost my company a significant opportunity. He paused. That was not a coincidence, was it? Arthur chose his attorney the way he chose everything else. Arthur was thorough, Cole said. Victor looked at the shovel head on the workbench. You're rebuilding it. Finishing it, Cole said. Arthur started it. Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he said something Cole did not expect. My father had a panhead, he said, in 1962. He restored it himself over about 6 years. It was the only thing I ever saw him work on with patience. He looked at the 1959 panhead in the showroom. I don't want that motorcycle, he said. I want to be clear about that. I never wanted the motorcycles. Cole looked at him. What do you want? The land, Victor said simply and directly. The corner of Route 9 and Blackwater Road. I've been watching that corner for 8 years. The traffic patterns, the commercial corridor development, the way Red Valley's growing north. In 4 years, that corner is going to be worth 3 times what it's worth now. I don't care about a motorcycle shop. I care about 4,000 square feet on the right corner at the right moment. Cole stared at him. Then why the collection, Cole said. Why tell me the bikes were what you wanted? Leverage, Victor said without embarrassment. If I said I wanted the land, you'd fight for the land. If you thought I wanted the bikes, you'd consider negotiating on the rest. He shrugged. It was a tactic. It's not working, so I'm telling you the truth. Cole absorbed that. The truth doesn't change my answer, Cole said. I know, Victor said, but I wanted you to have it anyway. He turned slightly. Cole, done my research on you, not just the legal record, the actual story, the tax situation. What you did. He paused. I respect what you did. I'm telling you that sincerely, which I realize means very little coming from the man standing in your shop trying to take it from you. It means something, Cole said, but not enough. Victor nodded once. He looked around the shop one more time. My company will withdraw the emergency injunction motion, he said. As of this afternoon, we'll let the probate challenge proceed on its normal timeline because Denny still has a right to pursue his claim and I have a contractual obligation to fund his legal costs. But I won't be adding to it. He looked at Cole directly. You should know that Denny called me this morning and asked to renegotiate our arrangement. He wants out. I told him I'd think about it. Cole kept his face still. Think faster, Cole said. Something moved behind Victor's eyes, not quite a smile, but the shadow of one. You know, he said, in another life, you would have been very good at this. I'm good at it in this life, Cole said. I just don't enjoy it. Victor left. The room exhaled. Marcus turned from the storage room doorway. Did he just withdraw the injunction, Cole said. Not the probate challenge. Denny still has a claim. But without Victor's resources behind it, Margaret said from the office where she had been listening with professional stillness. Denny's legal challenge is operating on a much smaller budget. Sandra can handle that. Sandra can handle it, Cole confirmed. He turned back to the workbench. His hands were not shaking, which surprised him because the inside of his chest was doing something complicated that involved equal parts relief and the recognition that this was not over, and the quiet, persistent awareness of Arthur's letter still folded against his heart. His phone rang. Denny, Cole picked up. I talked to Victor this morning, Denny said. His voice was different, the rehearsed steadiness gone something more unguarded in its place, the sound of a man who had made a decision and was living with it in real time. I asked him to let me out of our arrangement. He told me, Cole said, a pause. He came to the shop. Just left. Another pause. What did he want? The land, Cole said. He was honest about it, which I respect. But honest doesn't change the answer. Denny was quiet for a moment. The land, he repeated slowly. Not the shop, not the bikes. No, so he was never, Denny stopped. He told me he wanted to preserve the collection. He said he had a buyer lined up who was a serious collector and that he was going to make sure the bikes went to someone who appreciated them. He told me that every time I had doubts. Cole said nothing. He was just telling me what I needed to hear, Denny said. Not a question. Yes, Cole said. The silence on the line was long and specific. The kind of silence that comes when a person realizes they've been held in a story that wasn't true and are now standing in the open without it. I need you to understand something, Denny said finally. When I was 12 years old, my father missed my state championship baseball game because a man named, I don't even remember his name anymore, because some man came into the shop with a carburetor problem and my father couldn't leave him. I stood in the outfield that day and I looked at all the other fathers in the bleachers and I understood something that 12-year-olds shouldn't have to understand that clearly. He stopped. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I'm just telling you that it wasn't nothing. What I've been carrying, it wasn't nothing. I know, Cole said. I read the journals, Denny. Your father knew it too. He wrote about it. A sharp intake of breath. He wrote about me. Not by name, Cole said. But he wrote about the things he wished he'd done differently. He wasn't a man who thought he was perfect. He just didn't know how to be in two places at once. And he made choices and he lived with them the way we all do. He paused. He kept a photograph of you on his desk. I found it when I inventoried the office. You're maybe 8 or 9 in it. He kept it in a frame until the day he died. Denny said nothing. Come to the shop, Cole said. Come and read what he wrote, not as someone looking for ammunition, just as a son. The silence stretched. I'll come tomorrow, Denny said quietly. I'll be here, Cole said. He hung up and stood still for a moment. Then Raymond appeared in the office doorway and said, "Gloria Santana just arrived. She drove up from Great Falls. She brought her declaration and also her current employee roster because she wanted the court to see who she employs." He paused. "Cole, 8 of her 12 employees have prior records." Cole closed his eyes briefly. 8 people in one small bookkeeping operation in Great Falls. 8 people who had gotten a fair chance from a woman who had gotten a fair chance from a man who had gotten a fair chance from Arthur Whitmore in a shop in Red Valley, Montana. Third generation. 8 people, third generation. He opened his eyes. "Tell Gloria she's welcome to stay as long as she needs." He went back to the shovelhead. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Sandra called with the confirmation that Victor's emergency injunction motion had been officially withdrawn from the court record. The probate challenge remained active, but without the time pressure, and without Victor's full legal apparatus behind it, the shape of the fight changed entirely. They had their 30 days back. They had the heritage application under active review. They had the county workforce partnership formalized. They had 22 declarations from 22 people with documented connections to what Arthur Whitmore had built. Cole was at the workbench when Sandra told him, and he said thank you and set the phone down and looked at the shovelhead. It was close. He could feel it, the specific approaching completeness of an engine that had been taken apart correctly and was being put back together correctly. Each component finding its place with the particular rightness that comes from good sequence and good preparation. Arthur had done the hard work. He had organized it so well that finishing it was not a struggle. It was almost a conversation. Marcus came to stand beside him. "How long?" Marcus said, looking at the engine. "Hour," Cole said. "Maybe less." Marcus picked up a rag and started cleaning a component Cole had set aside. He didn't ask permission. He just started working, which was the right thing to do, and which told Cole something about Marcus Webb that the journals had already suggested, that he was the kind of person who moved toward work rather than away from it, who saw a thing that needed doing and did it without announcing the decision. They worked in silence for a while. Then Marcus said, without looking up from what he was doing, "Arthur's letter, the one addressed to you. He wrote that he'd been watching from a distance for years." "That's right," Cole said. "How did he watch?" Marcus said. "He's an old man in Red Valley. You were living out of state for most of the decade before you came here." Cole set down his wrench. He had been thinking about this too in the spaces between everything else. Arthur had said in the letter that he found Cole through his license plate that it took 2 years that he used people he trusted, but the watching that came after the years of it that required a different kind of network. "Margaret," Cole said. He called her from the workbench. When she picked up, he said, "Arthur said he watched me from a distance for years before I came to Red Valley." "How he was here?" "I was somewhere else." A pause. "Arthur had connections in the motorcycle community that went back 40 years, Margaret said carefully. "People he'd helped who had their own networks. Some of them were able to keep track of you generally. Not surveillance, just awareness, knowing which direction you were moving, when you left the chapter, when you relocated, when you came to Montana." "He knew I was coming to Montana," Cole said. "He knew you were in Montana," Margaret said. "He didn't know you'd come to Red Valley specifically, but he had arranged the property to stay in county holding, and Red Valley is a small town, and when you showed up here and rented a room from Patricia Guerrero." "Who told him?" Cole said. "Patricia has known Arthur Whitmore for 40 years, Margaret said simply. "She told him when a man named Cole Dawson rented her back room, and Arthur said, 'Good, it's time.'" Cole pressed the phone against his shoulder and looked at the ceiling of Arthur's shop. Mrs. Guerrero, who had never asked him what he'd done before Red Valley, who brought him tamales on Sunday nights, who lent him $12 for groceries without asking questions, and said she knew when a man was protecting something he wasn't ready to say out loud yet. 73 years old and in on it from the beginning. "Put me on hold for a second," Cole said to Margaret. He called Mrs. Guerrero. She answered on the first ring. "You knew," Cole said. A pause. Then in the unflappable voice of a woman who had been waiting for this exact phone call. "Arthur asked me to keep an eye out for you," she said. "He described you very well. He said you'd be quiet and you'd keep to yourself and you'd have a toolbox you hadn't pawned and you'd be the kind of man who fixed things instead of leaving them broken." Cole pressed his free hand flat against the workbench. "Mrs. Guerrero," he said. "Patricia," she said. "After all this time, Cole." "Patricia," he said, "you are something else." I am, she agreed pleasantly. Arthur was my neighbor for 31 years. He fixed my first husband's motorcycle 4 times and charged me nothing and never told anyone. When he asked me to look out for a certain kind of man, I said yes without him needing to explain why. She paused. Are you angry? No, Cole said, and he meant it completely. I keep finding out how big this thing was. Every time I think I understand the whole shape of it, there's more. That was Arthur, Patricia said. He was always larger than he looked. Cole thanked her. He hung up. He stood at the workbench and thought about the architecture of what Arthur Whitmore had constructed. Not just the shop, not just the journals, not just the letter and the strong box and the carefully oiled locks, and the county holding arrangement and the attorney in Missoula, but the entire human network, stretching back decades and forward, through lives he would never see held together by nothing more than the consistent, patient, unheroic act of believing in people at their lowest point and never asking for anything back. Then his phone buzzed, a text from a number he hadn't seen before. No name, just a number and 4 words. We need to talk. Then before he could respond, this is Hector. Not your phone, different situation. Call me on this number. Cole stepped away from the workbench and called. Hector picked up immediately. I didn't want to call on my regular number because I don't know who's paying attention to what he said, which immediately told Cole that whatever this was, it was serious. Hector Reyes did not invoke operational caution lightly. Talk, Cole said. Victor Harlan, Hector said. I've been doing some digging since you called me. Victor is not just a real estate developer. He's had 3 projects in the last 8 years that involved acquiring properties through contested estate proceedings. In 2 of those cases, the original challengers' people like Denny ended up in situations where their legal costs ballooned beyond what Victor had agreed to cover, which left them personally liable for court fees. In one case, the challenger ended up in a worse financial position than before Victor got involved. Cole went still. Victor lets people think they're partners and then uses the legal costs as leverage, Cole said slowly. He agrees to fund the legal challenge, Hector said. And then when it looks like things aren't going his way, the funding gets complicated. Suddenly there are conditions. Suddenly the challenger owes fees for filings Victor made on their behalf. Suddenly walking away from Victor costs more than staying. Denny, Cole said. If Denny pulls out of the arrangement, Hector said, depending on how their agreement is written, Victor may already have grounds to bill him for the legal costs incurred so far. The emergency injunction filing, the supplementary brief, all of it. That could be anywhere from $15,000 to $40,000. Cole felt the cold understanding of it settle through him. Denny hadn't just made a bad deal. He'd made a trap and walked into it. And Victor had let him because a trap partner was useful in ways a willing one wasn't. Does Denny know? Cole said. Almost certainly not, Hector said. That's how it works. You don't tell people about the trap until they try to leave. Cole thought about Denny's voice on the phone an hour ago, the unguarded quality of it. Precision already made the relief of it the way a man sounds when he believes he's getting free. He thought about what it was going to feel like for Denny when he found out that getting free was going to cost him $40,000 he didn't have. I need the name of a good attorney in Red Valley, Cole said. Not Sandra, she's handling the property case. Someone who does contract law. I know someone in Missoula who does pro bono work for people in bad agreements, Hector said. She's sharp and she works fast. Name's Vivian Torres. Call her, Cole said. Tonight. Tell her about Denny's situation. A pause. Cole, Denny tried to take your shop. I know, Cole said. He's the reason you had 10 days instead of 30. I know that too, Cole said. Call Vivian Torres. Hector was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Arthur would have done the same thing. I know, Cole said. That's the problem with reading a man's journals. He gets under your skin. He hung up, walked back to the workbench, picked up his wrench. Marcus looked at him. Cole shook his head slightly. Not now, and Marcus went back to what he was doing without asking. 20 minutes later, the shovelhead engine was complete. Cole set the last component in place and stepped back. He looked at it. Arthur had started it with the intention that whoever finished it would know who they were. Cole looked at the engine and then looked at Marcus Webb, who had been working alongside him for the last hour without needing to be asked, cleaning and handing and holding, with the ease of someone whose hands knew what they were doing without requiring conscious instruction. Marcus, Cole said. Marcus looked up. Cole nodded at the engine. Marcus stared at the shovelhead, at the completed assembly. He set down the rag he was holding. Cole, Arthur left it for whoever finished it, Cole said. He didn't finish it, we did, which means it's yours. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the engine again. I can't. You're going to run the training program, Cole said. The vocational partnership with the county. I need someone with mechanical credentials and the right disposition to lead it. That engine is part of your compensation, which means it's yours before you've even started. Which means Arthur was right about who you were before either of us knew it. Marcus pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. He looked at the shovel head for a long time. He never even met me properly, Marcus said. He wrote me a reference letter, and he never told me, and he saved that engine, and he stopped. He knew what he was doing, Cole said. He always knew what he was doing. At 5 o'clock that evening, 23 people were in or around Whitmore's Cycle and Repair. Some were working on declarations. Some were organizing the parts inventory for the heritage documentation. Cheryl was running a conference call with the county workforce board. Raymond was typing his declaration into a borrowed laptop, having decided his handwritten draft wasn't polished enough. Daniel Reeves was on the phone with 2 former employees of his billing shop, talking them through the declaration process. Gloria Santana and Kevin Garza were at the office desk going through Eddie Garza's hiring records and building a documented chain of custody from Arthur's shop to Eddie's shop to Gloria's operation in Great Falls. Cole stood in the middle of it and looked at all of it and thought, Arthur, this is yours. Every single person in this room is yours. And you did it by just showing up every day and being consistent and never making anyone feel like they owed you anything. His phone buzzed. Sandra, the probate hearing date is set, she said. 22 days from today. We have 22 declarations on record. Dr. Mestre's deposition is scheduled. The Heritage Review is active. The workforce partnership is formalized. She paused. And I just received something from Paul Ridley's office. Cole went still. What? Victor Harlan Properties is formally withdrawing from the probate challenge, Sandra said. Completely. Not just the injunction. The entire estate contest. Ridley says Victor is citing a strategic reassessment of the company's interests in the Red Valley commercial corridor. Cole said nothing for a moment. He's out, Sandra said. Cole, Victor is out. Cole looked around the room. At 23 people, at the 7 journals on Arthur's workbench, at the completed shovelhead engine, at the 1959 panhead with its chrome catching the light. I understood why Victor withdrew. Not because he was beaten in court, the court hadn't even met yet. Victor withdrew because he had done his math. He had looked at 22 declarations and a heritage designation and a county workforce partnership and a property attorney who had beaten him before, in a community that had apparently been quietly organized around a dead mechanics philosophy for 40 years. And he had calculated that the return on continued investment was not worth the fight. Victor Harlan was a practical man. Practical men knew when to cut their losses. What about Denny? Cole said. Without Victor's backing, Denny's legal standing in the probate challenge is significantly weakened, Sandra said. He could technically continue on his own, but the cost would fall entirely on him. And without Victor, he'd need his own attorney, his own filing fees, his own everything. He's going to get a bill from Victor, Cole said. Sandra paused. What do you know? Have Vivian Torres call you, Cole said. She's out of Missoula. She's working on Denny's contract with Victor. I think there's a way to protect him from the billing situation if we move fast. Another pause longer this time. You're protecting the man who tried to take the shop from you. Arthur would have, Cole said. A beat. Then I'm going to need a few minutes to be surprised by you before I get back to work, Sandra said. I'll call Vivian Torres in 10 minutes. Cole pocketed his phone. He turned on around and walked toward the office. He picked up Arthur's first journal from the workbench. As he passed, opened it to the first entry, and read Daniel Reeves's name one more time. 1987, a 24-year-old who couldn't get hired anywhere and who was now 61 years old in the next room on the phone, coaching 2 former employees of his own business through writing declarations for a shop he'd never even visited before this week. 37 years. One name in a composition notebook. This. Cole set the journal down and walked to the office and sat in Arthur's chair. He pulled the letter from his chest pocket. He unfolded it. He read the last paragraph one more time. I'm glad it was you. He refolded it carefully and put it back. Outside, someone arrived in the parking lot. Cole didn't go check. He had stopped bracing for bad news at some point in the afternoon without noticing when which felt like its own kind of progress. Margaret would handle it, or Marcus would, or someone else in that room full of people who had organized themselves around a purpose without being told to. He heard the front door open. He heard Margaret's voice say, "Denny." He heard Denny's voice say quietly, "I just heard Victor pulled out. I don't know what that means for me legally." He heard Margaret say, "Come in. There's someone who can explain that. And when he's done explaining, there's something you should read." Cole sat in Arthur's chair in Arthur's office and waited the way Arthur had waited, with patience and without conditions, for the right person to walk through the door. Denny Whitmore sat in his father's chair for a long time without speaking. Cole had given him the journals and left him alone in the office the way Arthur had left people alone with difficult things, without pressure, without commentary, without hovering at the door to monitor the reaction. The people in the shop moved around each other in the quiet efficiency of a shared purpose, and Cole went back to the workbench and worked on small things that didn't require full concentration because his ears were tracking the office even when his hands weren't. 40 minutes passed. Then Denny appeared in the office doorway. His face had changed, not dramatically, not in the Hollywood way of a man who has seen a revelation and been visibly transformed by it. More quietly than that, the calculation was gone from his eyes, which was the most significant thing, the constant low-level assessment that Cole had read there in every previous encounter, the habit of a man who had spent decades measuring every room for what it might cost him. That was gone. What was underneath it was older and more tired and more honest. He held the first journal in both hands. "He wrote about the baseball game," Denny said. Cole looked up. "He wrote about it," Denny said again, as if saying it twice was the only way to make it real. "I thought he didn't. I thought he never understood what that cost me. I thought he just didn't notice." He stopped. He looked down at the journal. He wrote 4 pages about it. He wrote that it was the worst decision he ever made, and that he knew it the moment he made it, and that he didn't know how to fix it afterward, so he just kept going. The way people keep going when they don't know how to stop and go back. Cole didn't say anything. "He said," Denny continued, and his voice was very careful now, the voice of someone reading aloud from a document they're afraid of dropping. "He said that the man who came in with the carburetor problem that day was named Frank DeLuca, and that Frank had just gotten out of a 3-month stint in county for a DUI, and that he'd lost his job and was about to lose his apartment, and that the carburetor was the one thing standing between Frank being able to drive to a job interview the next morning." Denny paused. "He said he made the wrong choice." Those exact words. He wrote, "I made the wrong choice, and I have not forgiven myself for it, and I have not stopped making it every day since, in 100 small ways, choosing the person at the door over the person in the house, and I do not know how to be a different kind of man than the one I became." The shop was very quiet. Raymond had stopped writing. Marcus was still. Daniel Reeves across the room was looking at the floor. "He knew," Denny said. "He knew the whole time." "He knew," Cole said. Denny set the journal down on the workbench with the particular care of someone handling something they now understand is irreplaceable. He pressed his palm flat on the cover for a moment. Then he looked at Cole. "Vivian Torres called me an hour ago," he said. "She went through my agreement with Victor line by line. The billing clause is real. Victor can claim up to $38,000 in legal fees if I withdraw." "I know," Cole said. "She said there's a counter-argument," Denny said, "that Victor misrepresented the nature of the arrangement in his own intentions when he recruited me. That he told me he wanted to preserve the collection when his actual interest was land acquisition, which constitutes material misrepresentation in a contract." He paused. "She said if we can document what Victor told me versus what his actual filing strategy showed, we might be able to void the billing clause entirely." "Can you document it?" Cole said. "I have emails," Denny said, "and texts. Victor was very specific in writing about the collection being the target. He sent me listings of comparable Harley sales to make his case." Something shifted in his expression, the residue of anger briefly visible. "He used my father's bikes to sell me on a deal that was never about my father's bikes." "Give everything to Vivian tonight," Cole said. Denny nodded. He looked around the shop again at the people, at the journals, at the completed shovelhead engine on the workbench. His eyes stayed on the shovelhead for a moment. "He started rebuilding that when I was about 15, Denny said quietly. "I used to watch him work on it on Saturday mornings. He never explained what it was for. He just worked on it. He looked at Cole. Did he say in the journals what it was for? He said it was for whoever finished it, Cole said, and that they'd know who they were. Denny absorbed that. Cole looked at him steadily. The offer I made still stands. There's a job here if you want it. Not because you're Arthur's son, because you're a person who made some bad decisions under pressure and is still standing here, which is the only qualification Arthur ever actually required. Denny was quiet for a long time. I don't know anything about motorcycles, he said finally. Neither did Cheryl Fontaine when she walked in here in 1991, Cole said. She could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded by the time she left. For the first time since Cole had met him, Denny Whitmore smiled. It was brief and complicated and real. He wrote about her too, he said. He wrote that she was the most naturally gifted person he had ever taught, and that he was pretty sure she was better at it than him within the first year. She was, Cheryl said from across the room without looking up from her laptop, which made Raymond laugh and made Denny's smile last a few seconds longer than it otherwise would have. He left shortly after, with Vivian Torres' number saved in his phone and a promise to send her the emails that night. Cole watched him go and felt something settle that had been unsettled for days, not resolution, not completion, but the sense of a weight shifting from opposition to something more workable. Denny Whitmore was not going to be simple. The grief and the resentment were real, and they weren't going to dissolve overnight. But he had come through the door, and in Arthur's philosophy, that was always the beginning. The next 3 weeks moved at a different pace than the first 10 days had. Not slower, there was too much work for slow, but more purposeful, less frantic. The difference between running from something and running toward it. Sandra filed the final set of declarations on day 427 in total from people spread across Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and as far as Colorado, where a man named Pete Harrington had moved in 1999 after Arthur taught him diesel mechanics and who had employed 31 people over 24 years in a truck repair operation outside Denver. Pete drove up for the Heritage Designation public comment session and spoke for 6 minutes in front of the county review board in a voice that did not shake once. The Heritage Designation public comment sessions were something Cole had not anticipated would feel the way they felt. He had expected a bureaucratic proceeding. Forms testimony board members asking procedural questions, the dry machinery of county government doing its slow, deliberate work. What happened instead was something that began formally and became by the second session something closer to a reckoning. People showed up who hadn't been contacted. People who had heard through the network, through the second-generation connections, through former employees that Arthur Whitmore's shop was fighting to stay standing. A woman came to the second session who had never worked for Arthur directly, but whose husband had in 1993, and who said simply that the 6 months her husband spent at that shop had been the turning point from which everything in their life that was good had grown, and that she had prayed for 30 years that she would someday have the chance to say so somewhere that mattered. The review board chair, a 60-year-old woman named Helen Marsh, who had lived in Red Valley her entire life, and who conducted proceedings with the practiced efficiency of someone who had attended 1,000 of them, visibly stopped taking notes at one point during the second session and just listened. Cole noticed it. He thought Arthur would have noticed it too and would have been embarrassed by it and would have gone home afterward and written careful notes about every person who spoke. On day 12, Vivian Torres filed a formal claim against Victor Harlan's billing clause. The claim detailed 14 specific instances in written communication where Victor had represented his interest as being in the motorcycle collection rather than the land, and argued that the entire arrangement had been structured on a material misrepresentation that voided Denny's financial obligations under the contract. Victor's attorneys responded within 48 hours, which was fast, which told Cole they were worried. On day 15, Cole's phone rang at 6 in the morning. Victor Harlan calling from his personal cell rather than through Ridley. Cole answered. "I want to resolve the Denny situation," Victor said. There was no preamble, which was how Cole knew this was as close to a genuine conversation as Victor was capable of having. "I'm willing to waive the billing clause entirely in exchange for Denny's formal withdrawal of any remaining estate claims." Cole thought about it for 3 seconds. "That's not your offer to make," he said. "That's between you and Denny. But I'll tell you this, if Denny calls me after you call him and says you're being straight with him, I'll consider it done. If he calls me and says it's conditional on something else," Vivian Torres keeps filing. A brief silence. You're not even a party to this dispute, Victor said, not angrily, almost with curiosity. No, Cole said, but Denny is, and I told him I'd make sure he wasn't alone in it. Another silence. Arthur Whitmore trained you well, Victor said. I never met Arthur Whitmore, Cole said. But yeah, he did. Victor called Denny that morning. Denny called Cole at 9:15 and said, he dropped it. Everything. Clean withdrawal, no conditions, no fees. His voice had the particular lightness of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just set it down and is still adjusting to the difference in their own weight. Good, Cole said. Cole, a pause. I'm going to come in next week if the offer's still there. It's still there, Cole said. On day 19, the heritage designation was formally approved by the County Review Board. Helen Marsh announced it in a 3-sentence statement that contained no emotion whatsoever, which was exactly right. It was a legal decision, not a ceremony, and it didn't need ornamentation. The designation meant that Whitmore's Cycle and Repair was now officially recognized as a commercial heritage site in Red Valley County, that any change of use or significant structural alteration would require a 60-day public review, and that the property was eligible for a range of county preservation resources, including grant funding and tax accommodation. Margaret called Cole when the announcement was posted online. She said, it's done, and then she didn't say anything else for a moment, and neither did Cole, and they stayed on the line in a silence that wasn't empty. How many declarations did we file in the end, Cole said. 27 primary, Margaret said, plus Dr. Mestre's medical deposition, plus the workforce partnership documentation, plus 31 years of Arthur's own business records that Sandra organized and filed as supporting historical documentation. She paused. The board chair told Sandra privately that she had never seen a heritage application supported by that volume of community testimony. She said it was the most clearly documented case of genuine community impact she had reviewed in 12 years on the board. Cole looked around the shop. He was alone in it at that moment, 6 p.m, everyone else gone home. The 3 motorcycles, the tool wall, the completed shovelhead engine, the workbench where Arthur had stopped and set things down in sequence, trusting that the sequence would be understood. Arthur would be embarrassed by all of it, Cole said. Completely mortified, Margaret agreed. He'd have gone home and written about it in a composition notebook and never mentioned it to anyone. Cole laughed. It came out of him unexpectedly and felt good, the clean, unpretentious kind of laugh that happens when something is genuinely funny and you're tired enough to let it happen without thinking about it. He locked the shop that night and drove to Mrs. Guerrero's, Patricia. She opened the door before he knocked, which meant she had been watching for his truck, which was something she would deny if asked. Heritage designation, she said. Heritage designation, he confirmed. She nodded once with the satisfied expression of someone who has been patient about something for a long time and has finally been vindicated. She went to the kitchen and came back with 2 small glasses of something amber and handed him one without asking. They sat in her living room and didn't talk for a while. Arthur told me once, Patricia said eventually, that the thing he was most afraid of was that he would die and the shop would sit there and slowly fall apart, and nobody would ever know what it had been. He said the building could collapse and the motorcycles could rust, and that would be sad but manageable. What he couldn't bear was the idea that the people inside the ones he tried to help would start to doubt that it had mattered, that they'd look back on it and wonder if it was real or if they'd invented the significance of it. Cole looked at his glass. It mattered, he said. I know, Patricia said. Now those 27 people know, and whoever comes through the door next knows. And that's the whole thing, really. That's what Arthur was trying to build, not the shop, but the certainty, the undeniable documented public certainty that it mattered. Cole thought about that on the drive back to his room. He thought about it through the next 3 days as the shop moved from crisis mode into something more like steady work. Marcus took over the vocational training program development with a thoroughness that made Cole think Arthur had known exactly what he was doing when he pointed at that shovelhead engine and said, whoever finishes it will know who they are. Cheryl formalized the county employment partnership into a 6-month curriculum with measurable outcomes and a waiting list that had 9 names on it within the first week of being announced publicly. Raymond wrote a short piece about the shop for the local paper. Not a press release, just a personal account. 4 paragraphs is the kind of writing that doesn't announce itself as important, but lands differently than important writing usually does. The paper ran it on a Wednesday. By Thursday afternoon, Cole had received 11 phone calls from people who had read it. 3 were from people with prior records looking for a chance. 2 were from mechanics offering to volunteer time. 1 was from a veterans organization in Missoula asking if the shop would consider a formal partnership for transitional employment. 1 was from a woman in Bozeman who said her father had been in Arthur's journals and had died in 2018, and that she had been looking for years for someone who could tell her what her father had been like when he was young and struggling. Before she knew him, and that reading, Raymond's piece, had led her to the shop, and could she come and read what Arthur had written about him? Cole told her yes. She came on Friday. Her name was Elaine Reeves, and she was Daniel's daughter, which Cole realized only when Daniel called ahead to say she was coming, his voice carrying the particular texture of a man who has had to explain something about his past to his child and is still processing how it went. I told her everything, Daniel said on the phone. The conviction, the year in county, all of it. She already knew most of it, but not the shop part. I never talked about Arthur because I didn't know how to explain what he was without sounding like I was making excuses for how bad things had been. What did she say? Cole said. She said she wanted to read what he wrote about me, Daniel said. She said she didn't want to know her father through his worst year. She wanted to know who he was becoming. A pause, and his voice thickened slightly enough that Cole could hear it. Cole, my daughter is 34 years old, and she drove 6 hours to read what a dead man wrote about her father in 1987. You understand what that is? I understand, Cole said. That's because of you, Daniel said. You opened the shop. Arthur opened the shop, Cole said. I just unlocked the door. Elaine Reeves sat in Arthur's office for an hour with the 1987 journal. Cole did not go in. He worked at the workbench and let her have the time, the way Arthur had let people have things without standing over them to watch it happen. When she came out, her eyes were clear and her chin was up, and she said, he wrote that my father was going to be fine. He wrote that in the first week he didn't know yet, he couldn't have known, but he wrote, this one is going to be fine. She stopped. How did he know? He knew what he was looking for, Cole said. He'd been looking for it long enough. She shook Cole's hand with both of hers and drove back to Billings, and Cole watched her car leave the parking lot and thought about the particular geometry of what had just happened. A daughter who drove 6 hours to read a dead man's faith in her father who had come to Red Valley because of a newspaper piece written by a 74-year-old veteran who had once sat in a truck in a parking lot for 4 hours before getting out. Who had written that piece because Cole had read journals in a building he bought for $13 because an old man oiled the locks and waited for a man on Highway 93 to find his way to Montana. Everything connected. Everything had always connected. Arthur had just been patient enough to wait for the connections to become visible. The hearing that never happened was its own kind of ending. Sandra filed the formal documentation of the heritage designation, the workforce partnership, the withdrawal of Victor's challenge, and Denny's formal agreement not to pursue further estate claims, all as a consolidated package with the county probate court. The judge reviewed the submission on a Tuesday, issued a 1-paragraph order confirming the county auction title transfer as uncontested and final. And that was it. No courtroom, no testimony, no dramatic moment under fluorescent lights. Just a paragraph in a document that arrived in Sandra's email, in which she forwarded to Cole with the subject line done. Cole read it in the shop, sitting at Arthur's workbench with the smell of engine oil around him and the sound of Marcus talking through a carburetor, rebuild with the program's first official apprentice, a 26-year-old named Tomas, who had shown up on the first day of the program with a record and a mechanical aptitude that Marcus had identified within the first 30 minutes as genuinely exceptional. Cole read Sandra's email twice. Then he forwarded it to Margaret and Cheryl and Raymond and Daniel and everyone else he had a number for with 3 words of his own. It's ours. Clean. The replies came in over the next hour. Raymond's was a single sentence, Arthur is satisfied. Daniel's was a string of words that didn't quite form grammatically but communicated clearly. Marcus walked out of the training area where he'd been working with Tomas, read the forwarded email on his phone and said, yeah, the way a person says it when one syllable is doing the work of a paragraph. Denny came in the following Monday. He arrived at 7:15 in the morning before most people with work boots and no particular ceremony about it. He found Cole at the workbench and said, what do you need me to do? And Cole said, you any good with paperwork? And Denny said, I spent 15 years in logistics management. I'm very good with paperwork. Cole handed him the pile of parts inventory documentation that had been accumulating on the corner of the desk for 2 weeks, and Denny took it to the office and started working through it without another word. By noon, he had organized 3 weeks of filing into a system that was cleaner than anything Cole could have built, cross-referenced with the heritage application documentation and the workforce program records. He came out of the office and said, "You need a proper filing system. I can build one this week if you give me the materials." Cole said, "Build it." Denny went back into the office. At the end of the day, Denny stood at the workbench, looking at the shovel-head engine complete assembled, waiting. He hadn't mentioned it all day. Cole had noticed him not mentioning it. "Marcus is going to write it," Cole said. "When we get it back in a frame, it's his." Denny nodded slowly. He ran one finger along the engine case the way you touch something you know the history of. "He used to let me sit on the tanks when I was little," he said, "the bikes in the showroom. He'd lift me up and let me sit there and make engine sounds, and he'd stand next to me and make them too." He stopped. "I forgot that until I read the journals. He wrote about it. He called it the best 15 minutes of any given week." Cole looked at him. "The best 15 minutes of any given week," Denny said again. "He wrote that." "He wrote a lot of things he couldn't say," Cole said. Denny nodded once. He straightened up from the workbench. "I'll be here tomorrow," he said. 7:15. 7:15, Cole confirmed. 6 weeks after the county auction on a Thursday morning in early October, when the air had the first edge of Montana winter in it, Cole arrived at the shop to find Raymond Cho sitting on the front step. Not in his truck in the parking lot the way Margaret had described him doing twice a year for years. On the front step, as if he had decided that waiting outside was no longer the appropriate relationship to have with the place. Cole sat down next to him. They sat in the quiet for a moment. "I used to sit in that parking lot," Raymond said, "and try to feel close to it without going inside, because going inside meant it was real. And if it was real, then I had to decide what I was going to do about the fact that Arthur Whitmore gave me something I never thanked him for." "You're inside now," Cole said. Raymond said, "I came to terms with it." He paused. "I wrote him a letter. Last week. I know he's dead. I know he can't read it. I wrote it anyway, and I left it on the desk in the office." He looked at Cole. "Is that strange?" "No," Cole said immediately. "Good," Raymond said, "because I have a lot more to say to him, and I plan to keep writing." They went inside together. The shop was alive, in the way that it had been alive since the beginning, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the persistent, unpretentious energy of work being done by people who understood what the work was for. Marcus and Tomas were at the workbench. Denny was in the office. Cheryl was on a call with the second cohort of the workforce program, which had 12 names on it now. 2 new apprentices were coming in the following week, a 31-year-old named Sandra Koo, who had done 18 months for a nonviolent offense and had a gift for electrical systems that Cheryl had identified through the county employment office intake process, and a 58-year-old retired soldier named William Garrett, who had been out of work for 2 years and who had shown up at the community center asking about the vocational program with the careful, slightly formal manner of a man who was asking for something he wasn't sure he deserved to ask for. Cole had spoken with William on the phone the previous day. He had the same quality that Raymond had described about himself in '98, the reluctance to ask the sitting in the parking lot the 4 hours before getting out. Cole had recognized it immediately. He had told William what Arthur had never said to the people who came through his door, but had written in his journals about why he didn't say it. "You don't have to explain yourself to me. I don't need to understand where you've been before I can tell you where you're going. Just come in." William had been quiet on the phone for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, sir." Cole had told him not to call him sir. William had said he'd try. On the last Friday of October, Owen was alone in the shop at 7 in the evening, the way he was often alone in the shop at 7 in the evening, which was not loneliness. He had learned to distinguish between the two, carefully as a man should who had confused them for years. He was at the workbench running a standard maintenance check on one of the vintage bikes when his phone rang. "Unknown number," he answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's, older, unhurried, with the particular clarity of someone who has thought carefully about what they want to say before they pick up a phone. "My name is Diane Whitmore," she said. "I was Arthur's wife. I passed away in 1999, which I realize makes this call somewhat surprising." Cole went completely still. Then the voice continued, slightly warmer. I'm sorry, that was my daughter-in-law's idea of an introduction. I'm Diane Whitmore, Arthur's sister-in-law, his wife Evelyn's younger sister. I'm 78 years old and I live in Bozeman, and I've been following what's been happening through Margaret Tillis for the past 6 weeks. Cole breathed. You scared me, he said. Diane liked that, the woman said, and he could hear the smile in it. I'm calling because I have something that belongs to you, or belongs to the shop, which is the same thing now. She paused. When Evelyn died, Arthur gave me a box of things for safekeeping. He said to hold them until the shop was in the right hands, and that I would know when that was. I've been holding that box for 24 years. Cole sat down on the stool next to the workbench. What's in the box, he said. Letters, Diane said, from the people Arthur helped. Some of them sent letters back over the years. Thank you letters, update letters, letters about what their lives had become. Arthur kept them in a shoebox. He never read them a second time after the first time. He told me once that reading them felt too much like taking credit, and he didn't want to take credit. He wanted the things in that box to belong to the people who wrote them. A pause. I think he meant them for whoever came after. Someone who would understand what they were. Cole looked at the workbench, at Arthur's journals, at the tool wall with its careful outlines, at the shovelhead engine and the 3 motorcycles in the office where Raymond had left a letter for a dead man, and Denny had found his father in handwriting, and Elaine Reeves had learned who her father was becoming in 1987. Can you bring the box here, he said. I was planning to, Diane said. I've been waiting for someone to ask. Another pause. Margaret tells me you bought the property for $13. $13, Cole confirmed. Arthur always said the most valuable things had the least impressive price tags, Diane said. He said anyone can buy something expensive. It takes a specific kind of person to see the value in what everyone else has decided isn't worth their time. Cole looked around the shop. He was right, Cole said. He usually was, Diane said. Drove Evelyn absolutely crazy. He was smiling when he hung up. He sat alone in the shop for a while after that, in the particular quiet of a place that has been filled with people all day and retains their warmth after they leave. The smell of engine oil and leather and old machinery. The 7 journals on the shelf he'd built for them specifically at eye level, where anyone who came through the office door would see them first. The tool wall, the workbench. He pulled Arthur's letter from his chest pocket. He had carried it every day since he read it the first time. He was aware that this was something that carrying a dead man's letter against your chest every day for 6 weeks was the kind of thing that required acknowledgement at some point. He had been putting off the acknowledgement the way you put off things that matter, protecting them from the pressure of being thought about too directly. He unfolded it one more time. Read the last paragraph one more time. I'm glad it was you. Cole refolded the letter carefully. He stood up from the stool. He walked to the office. He opened the second drawer of Arthur's desk, the one that had been empty when he first inventoried the place, waiting the way empty things wait, and he placed the letter inside. He left the drawer open, not empty anymore. The next morning, Marcus arrived first, then Tomas, then Denny with his 7:15 punctuality, then Raymond, who came through the front door now without pausing with the ease of a man who has decided where he belongs. Then Cheryl, then William Garrett on his first official day, arriving 12 minutes early, standing in the parking lot until Cole came out and said, William, you can come inside. And William said, yes, sir. And Cole said, Cole. And William said, yes, Cole, and came through the door. Sandra Koo came at 8 with a tool roll under her arm that she'd clearly been assembling herself, organizing her own instruments before she'd even started, the instinct of a person who was already treating this as a place they intended to be serious in. Cole watched her unroll the toolkit on the workbench, and he thought about Arthur's first journal, the first entry, 1987, a young man who couldn't get hired anywhere. Now it was a 26-year-old with an instinct for organization, and a 58-year-old veteran who arrived early, and a 31-year-old who brought her own tools before she'd been taught anything, and behind them a waiting list of 12 more people, and behind those 12 people, the memory of 27 who had testified before a county review board, and behind those 27 the network that ran 3 generations deep into the lives of people Arthur Whitmore had believed in when belief was the only resource he had to offer. Cole stood in the middle of the shop and let the morning happen around him. I thought about $13. He thought about a highway in October and 40 minutes in the cold and a tire he had fixed without thinking about it and then completely forgotten. He thought about a man who had not forgotten, who had written it in a journal, and carried it through 20 years and oiled the locks and arranged the auction and put an envelope on a strong box and trusted the architecture of his own belief to hold together long enough for the right person to walk through the door. Cole Dawson had walked into Red Valley, Montana with a mildewed room and a toolbox he hadn't pawned, and his last $20, and he had bought a building nobody wanted for 13 of those dollars because something in his chest pulled him toward it in a way he couldn't explain and didn't try to. He had not fixed a broken thing. He had found a whole thing that had been waiting patient and complete for someone to understand that it was whole. Arthur Whitmore had not built a motorcycle shop. He had built a proof, a living, documented, multi-generational proof that one person's decision to believe in other people does not end with that person. It travels. It multiplies. It shows up in the filing systems of the children of the people you helped, and in the tool rolls of young women who bring their own instruments on the first day, and in the morning arrivals of old soldiers who come 12 minutes early because they have learned in a hard life that being somewhere on time is a form of respect. And it shows up in the chest pocket of a broke biker who raised his hand at an auction when nobody else did, because sometimes the most important thing a person can do is simply refuse to walk away from something that still has value, even when every sensible voice in the room is telling them that the price is too high and the problems are too many and the odds are too long. The shop opened at 8 o'clock that morning, the way it had opened every morning for 33 years before it closed, and the way it would open every morning after. Not because Cole Dawson had saved it, but because Arthur Whitmore had built it to save itself, and had waited with the particular patience of a man who understood the long math of human decency for someone to come along and prove him right. He had been right all along. The door was open.